All right, we are now live. Hi, Pike. How are you?
Um, I'm dreading discussing the legal issues of this episode. I'm
Yeah,
dreading it.
that's fine. I think your profile picture really kind of reflects your opinion right now. You're just dead eye stare, unhappy about the.
Yeah, I'm gonna have this profile picture in 2 episodes because that one is also gonna get it.
How dare you insult
Uh,
Move Along Home?
I, I'm gonna do it, buddy. Anyways,
Yeah, this
uh,
is this is the so I did rewatch it, and it has some merits, but I definitely feel this is the first bad episode. And I don't just mean like bad for DS9 standards. We've discussed some that I'm kind of like, this is a very meh episode by DS9 standards. Whereas like
yeah,
I sometimes prefaced it by saying, well, it's good by like
oh, for
general TV.
TNG,
Well, yeah, it's good by TNG standards or it's good by general TV standards. This episode is actually bad. I wouldn't say it's an F. There's some interesting stuff going on. We do get
is a
some
D.
character work. It's definitely a low D. And
Yeah,
part of what I want to discuss here, because this is a perfect opportunity, let's discuss the Trill. Because this is a species that I have a lot of baggage with when it comes to like them in the series. And
yeah.
Star Trek has always had a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to making things, I guess, like realistic in how an intergalactic society would function, with obviously
Yeah.
varying species of different skill sets and abilities. And what I like to look at a lot of times is not necessarily the gold standard, but a very good standard everyone is familiar with, is Mass Effect. So much in Mass Effect
Yeah.
gives way to all these species are super unique in their own ways, but for the most part, no one definitively is better than the others except for Asari, but there's a lore reason for that.
Yeah.
And one thing that really helps this like make a sci-fi setting believable is if you want to have all these species interacting with one another, you have to have a reason why some don't essentially dominate the others. And
Yeah.
prior to Mass Effect 3, I was like, the Asari really should be the ones who are just in charge of everything.
Yeah.
So like,
Because
you
they're the
have
ones who
you,
are smarter. Are they stronger? I can't
so
recall. I
kind
know
of.
they can breed with everybody.
Well,
I
yeah.
know they can breed.
So there's a they're obviously incredibly long living. So that just sort of I don't necessarily know if they're necessarily more intelligent, but they live 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So
You have
they'd
so
be
much
yeah.
accumulating wisdom.
You're going to be incredibly wise and intelligent. Some of the youngest ones we interact with are already like centuries older than any human capable is.
Liara is just like
Yeah.
a fucking. I
She's
can imagine
118, I
she's.
believe. She's like 118, something. She's around 100. Uh,
Yeah, and whenever I think of her qualifications, I feel like she's at least the equivalent of Jadzia here because Jadzia brings up like all she has, and like I would fully believe Liara has the equivalent in Mass Effect. She's very, and then later on in the series, it's like, oh, yep, here we go,
Yeah, and it's so,
Liara.
but there's other things too. So and I'm hoping I can get this right. It's been a long time since I've looked at some Mass Effect stuff. Solarians, they're sort of the weird bug-eyed ones that look like generic like gray aliens, but like not generic. They don't look exactly like that, but they're
Frog,
kind of the
frog
closest.
grays,
Yeah,
frog grays,
but
I call
so one thing I like about them is they actually are smarter than like every other race. They're smarter. They have higher reflexes. They're fairly strong, but that is because of an
but it burns
exceptionally
through their life pretty much.
yeah, that is
Like,
because of an exceptionally high metabolism that essentially renders them like the oldest of them is going to be about 40 years old. So
yeah,
they're a candle that burns twice as hot but half as long, or twice as bright but half as long. And that's an interesting balance, right? It's like there's probably not a lot of super wise and sagacious Solarians comparatively to other races because they just do not have time to garner that sort of wisdom. To them, it's
yeah,
they hit the ground running and they have like I think I remember like they all become very hyper focused. Like basically like from like age 8, they're basically in their career path for the rest of their life. Simply because
yeah,
that's
because
kind
that's
of what you
basically
need
adult.
to yeah, that's kind of what you
Yeah,
need to do for them. And you have the Krogans, which are like they were elevated up by the Solarians to deal with the I think the Rachni
can I?
invasion.
Yeah,
Yeah, but they have the genophage. So all these species are like there's merits and flaws to them. Star Trek has never been like that.
yeah.
You
From the
have
beginning, Vulcans have been an issue.
yeah, Vulcans
Vulcans.
Vulcans live like an absurd amount of time. They have like psychic abilities. They're physically I think
They're
they're five
smarter.
times
They're
yeah, they're
stronger.
I think they're 5 to 10 times stronger than the average human. There's actually an episode later in the series that really delves with, unironically, a Vulcan supremacist who believes Vulcans are just the superior human or superior to humans in
How
every
many
single way.
times? I believe every time after he did his moment, he would anytime he wrote a psychological paper, he would open with basically like the opening would just be discussing what he did to prove himself over a human, just to mock that human and mock the ideas of humans being equal. It is
Yeah,
like
and
holy
but it's like
yeah
that's what you would unironically have a lot more of. Now, of course, there's character elements. There's the culture of the species where they're very reserved. They wouldn't necessarily go for galactic domination, but
yeah
it's one of those things where I almost don't believe they would view a lot of species as their equal, given the amount of benefits they have above humans. There's a
yeah. I
few
think
there's a few
from
other
what
species that are like that in this setting. Trill is
mhm.
definitely among them as like like we said it kind of before in a previous episode. Jadzia fills what I feel is a lot of the roles of like of Data from TNG, where she is this wealth of knowledge. Like, oh yeah, the breadth of her knowledge is absurd. She has multiple PhDs. She has 350 years of experience in her. She's kind of like Data, where Data was basically informed on like every single topic that no one else was an expert on. So
Yeah,
you
and
know, history facts, science facts. Data always had information for that because that's kind of what his role is. But he was countered by
he's an android.
he's an
Yeah,
android
he's
and he doesn't have any the emotional complexity of a human. That's his arc. He's trying to understand humanity. So a lot of times he'd be put in social situations that he just can't function in.
yeah
Jadzia doesn't have that issue, and this is where I think
yeah
my problem with Trill start is Jadzia as a character is so much further advanced than a lot of other characters, but it's not always presented that way. She is oftentimes presented as an equal to a lot of these people, and it kind of comes across as like, exactly how much smarter are you? Like, because sometimes she's incredibly effective at what she does, and sometimes she's, as effective as any other Starfleet officer.
she gets warped.
I wouldn't say she
Uh,
gets warped per se, because like again, there's episodes where it's like she can hold her own in a fight with a Klingon, she can hold her own in a battle of wits with any other character, and it's like, wow, you really are just like incredibly like long-lived, incredibly wise, incredibly intelligent, incredibly effective at what you do. And then there's other episodes where it's like, oh, but like she's not as effective as you think she would be, and
yeah,
like she's
at
not
least
as
with um, I was gonna bring up with the Vulcans and like in comparison to Trill, at least so from what I've seen of Enterprise, I'm partway through season one. It seems to be very much like humanity is proving that it can be that because like in Enterprise and Star Trek's early history in terms of like our contact with Vulcans, the the Vulcans have been just manipulating and like basically manipulating species so that they're ready to basically ascend to spacefaring and like going intersolar, right?
mhm.
And that's Enterprise's story of like humanity saying, you don't need to do this for us anymore. We are your equal, and we can provide solutions that you can't because you only look at it as this distant overseer who, while smarter, is like just not at the ground level to be able to handle it. And but that never happens with the Trill because to be fair, Trill aren't as important as species, but it's like you because of like they never focus on the aspects that should be focused on enough in terms of like showing the flaws of Trill society. I think like it's never like a recurring issue of the selection process and how competitive it is and how it probably like really disenfranchises a lot of people, or you have these long-lived symbiotes that have all this wisdom, why aren't they in charge, or are they actually in charge of Trill? And like again, this should be disenfranchising a lot of Trill and pushing them to be against the status quo that is very should be very conservative
Well, yeah,
of
I mean, I definitely 100% agree. This episode does a little bit to sort of reveal some of that information because I would say this is the first big Trill episode. We have had at
yeah.
least one in TNG, so this is really the
Yeah,
first big
it
one
was
where we
where they were
actually get,
introduced,
yeah,
and they
and we have
actually
no,
sorry, I
please
had
go on, please go on.
TNG knowledge. Um, in TNG, this is the first. So, like Jadzia as a whole, as a Trill, is different from what TNG Trill were. at least in terms of appearance, because of the fact of in TNG they actually had basically like forehead ridges, like this prosthetic they had to put on, and Riker had to wear it for a bit because oh boy he's got to have the symbiote for a bit because the past host died suddenly, but they actually had to retcon that because the actress for Jadzia, I can't remember if it was just uncomfortable for her to wear or she was actually allergic to something in it, and that's why they now have the dark spots along their body. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to kind of get back to a point I wanted to make before is, see, one of the criticisms I kind of have of Star Trek writing in general is a lot of times alien species will be very one note. They will have almost a singular core personality trait that's a lot
Hmm.
more unified than
Hmm.
humanity ever is, both how it's portrayed in the series and just, in real life. Now, I'm not saying every single alien from a species needs to be characterized. You need to have incredibly complex world building for every single alien species. I'm not saying you have to have that, but when you have a
Hmm.
series like this, like, to sort of portray all Vulcans as like, oh, you all see yourself as the overseers and you all can't like see this other perspective. I'm like, are you saying the entirety of the species, the spacefaring species, is incapable of seeing things from a different perspective and being aware of that? It's like, I'm not. Again, it's possible,
Yeah.
but it's very like it's very simplified writing. And one of the examples
Yeah.
that Star Trek, the DS9 does to sort of get away from that is with the Ferengi. The Ferengi were incredibly one note in TNG, and now they're incredibly diverse in terms of how they view things. They're a lot more complex and complicated. So
Yeah.
DS9 does a lot to try and expand upon this one species. And of course, this just sort of shows the error of some other examples. And again, even when we see the Vulcan in the later season who's this incredible like Vulcan supremacist, I'm like, yeah, that's probably a viewpoint we've never seen before from a Vulcan, but I can imagine it's very common. How would you, as like a 200-year-old Vulcan who has psychic powers and can fight any human, like, oh, I have to like I joined this starship, and although I don't think a Vulcan at 200 would be joining the starship, but like let's say 100. Let's say a 100-year-old Vulcan joins a starship, and you have to like obey this like fresh from the academy like ensign. You'd be like, screw this kid. Like,
That comes up a lot actually in real world militaries where it's like an E7 to an E9, a new second lieutenant fresh out of the academy comes in, like they think they're gonna change the game. It's like, haha, no, you're gonna be mentored by me, buddy,
yeah,
because you do
it's just
not know how the military.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's even worse. I mean, like I've obviously if anyone has ever worked in an office, sometimes there could be almost like an awkward dynamic between when you're the same level of position as someone who's much older than you, because it's almost
Hmm.
like you're this young naive kid going into the workforce, this office space, and they've been here for like 5 years, but you're in the same job. So it's kind of like,
Hmm.
huh, like I presently have a coworker who's like 22 years older than me, but I'm technically their boss, and it's like,
Hmm.
huh, you know. Me having to tell them what I feel awkward when they call me like sir and stuff like that. I'm like, oh god, don't do that. I feel weird.
Yeah.
I feel weird when you're so
Yeah.
much older than me. But anyway,
Pretty
it's
much
just
the
like,
first day, if I was, I told you that I was in JROTC, and like at one point I thought about going to the military.
mhm.
If I was ever in a similar situation to you, I would basically just like first day away from everyone else, just say like, listen, in front of them you can say sir, but please in private when you're like, just don't drop the sir. Please treat me like the idiot I really am compared to you, because it's just like, ah, it's so weird. It's
Yeah,
so
and
weird.
to bring this back to the Trill, when you have these like 300-year-old Trill who have just such a breadth of experience, it sometimes gets a bit questionable writing when they don't have an answer to the solution, they act inappropriate or like inexperienced, and it's just an issue that you kind of have to address. Jadzia
Hmm.
really, for all intents and purposes, should be the most effective person on this station at any problem. Curzon, the previous host for her symbiote,
Great diplomat.
was not just a diplomat, he was the mentor to Cisco. Like
Yeah.
Cisco regularly says, and he says a few times in this episode, that without Curzon he wouldn't be the man he was today. So it's like, well, wait a minute, Jadzia has access to all that knowledge and wisdom. So by that
Yeah.
metric, she has everything that made, more or less, not everything, but a good chunk of what made Cisco the man he is today. She immediately has access to that, and also a few other lifetimes worth of experience plus her own. So we get into
Yeah.
this really questionable question of exactly what does it mean to be a symbiote. Now, from what we've been told, Jadzia was 20, I believe she was 27 when she was given the symbiote.
Hmm.
And she's recently given the symbiote. Definitely in terms of Star Trek world, she's pretty young for her career in her career,
Hmm.
and she seems to have more or less all access to their knowledge. It doesn't always seem to maybe immediately come to her, right? It's not like her reflexes are honed by these past lives, but there's never a
Yeah.
situation where she's like, I can't remember certain information. In fact, it does actually come up that Cisco mentions in a previous episode that Jadzia will sometimes default to talking about something as if it was her when he knows it was
Mm.
Curzon. So
Yeah.
there is a level of overlap, and that could be something you discuss the nature of. Well, what does that mean for your identity that you have this symbiote shoved into you? Now, we get that later on. We get a symbiote later on who she was suddenly given a symbiote, and as a result, it really screws around with her identity. However, Jadzia and all symbiotes or all Trill who are supposed to join with a symbiote, they are specifically trained and
Mm.
cultivated before they're joined, so that that doesn't happen.
Yeah,
Right?
but
She
even with
doesn't.
Jadzia is happening.
Well, so
Like,
I'd imagine it's not perfect, right? There's always going to be a small degree, but what I mean is, like with Jadzia, we don't. There's never any worry that she has a issue with self identity. I don't think that ever becomes a problem with her, except for maybe one small arc we get. But she never has a problem with her self identity, which you feel would be the biggest problem you could throw at this character to really give them some depth and limitations. But we don't have
yeah.
that. She seems fully capable of accessing this information. It's like Avatar, you know, and not the James Cameron movies, the Avatar: Last Airbender. Aang has these
You
past
have
lives,
this
but they don't.
incredible legacy that
Yeah,
you're
but
forced to carry.
yeah, but the thing is, Aang has access to all this Avatar stuff, but it doesn't really impact his identity. He doesn't
Mm.
really have an example of, well, my past life killed people, so I feel like I've killed people. That's never an issue for him. And that's the same way it's like for Jadzia. She never seems to
Mm.
have any sort there is actually one of the first comments she makes towards Cisco in this regard is, you can't treat me like Curzon. I'm not Curzon. And that feels like something all Trill who are joined would have to tell their, friends and family and stuff like that. Is, I might have, the memories and experience and lifetime knowledge of a friend of yours, but I'm not him. That would be the first thing you probably have to say to a lot of people. So
Mhm.
again, there's this clear thing of she has access to this information, but it's not like it's corrupting her, right? It's not like it's influencing who Jadzia is. She has a very strong sense of self-identity. She just happens to have all this extra information. That's how it's kind of been presented in the series so far. And
Mm. Mhm.
that's just really overpowered. And then of course,
Yeah.
there's the additional nature of the symbiote itself. I really don't like how this so we know that the culture of the Trill, and now we're kind of getting less about the individual and more about the whole culture. Not every Trill becomes a symbiote. I can't recall. Maybe you could find me the exact number, but I think presently it's 100th or something. It's very few actually become
Uh,
symbiotes.
they say so. Yeah, it's like they say even with the original number, there's competition. They say only 10% can become hosts, and even that is hyper competitive.
Yeah,
Like it's like there's just not enough symbiotes. So yeah, like 1 in 100, you could maybe say.
yeah. Because if
You
only
know,
10% are even possible, and then after that, it's a strict
supposedly.
process. It could be it's less than 10% actually become Trill hosts, and I go so far as to say it's probably less than 1%. Now,
Mm.
there's a very big kind of question you have in terms of a world building element that we don't really see. Trill symbiotes would probably be the dominant like group within Trill
Mhm.
society.
Oh yeah.
The reverence they have for it, but also just the sheer experience and knowledge. I mean, imagine if you had right a politician, a Trill politician, like someone who makes decisions for their planet's government. Imagine they were a host, or they were a host. They die, and this symbiote goes into a new person. That person then runs for government. I mean,
Mhm.
if you were a supporter of the previous politician or their policies, you'd be like, well, this person has just an absurd amount of knowledge in this field. Why not give them the position, or why not vote for them? So you mentioned it before. Their society would probably be incredibly conservative because you would just have these 400-year-old Trill symbiote hosts who would just have such influence over their culture. They'd be like, why change it? It's worked for 400 years. And I would know. I was there when
Yeah.
we implemented the policy. Like, it's like there's so much stuff there that's just like incredibly questionable. It's the same nature of like, what would society be like if people were immortal? Right? If people couldn't
Yeah.
die, you'd have people who are in their 20s. You can't possibly compete with people who are like 200 years old. You can't possibly
Yeah.
be. So imagine, you're a Trill and you're like, oh man, I really want this job. It's like, well, it's between you and a symbiote. It's like, oh, damn it. Like, it's not going to be me. They're never going to choose me.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
and then I remember making a joke. Imagine being the first symbiote for or first host for a symbiote, where it's like,
Yeah.
congratulations, you get all the burden of this, but none of the experience because you're the first. It's like, oh man, I don't know. I find that
Mm,
funny. Like, I bet there's like a very select group who are allowed to like become the first symbiote for a host because you probably want to start with a good foot forward. Like maybe you're
yeah,
given an option,
absolutely.
like, hey, you succeeded in this, and we want to actually offer you like, hey, do you want to be the first host for a new symbiote? Like, you're not going to get any of the benefits from it, so it does kind of suck, but you're also the first. That's a special place of privilege probably in like society. So,
Yeah.
and then from what I recall, and I'm going to be double checking memory alpha here, I believe the symbiote. There's no canon length they live, but they live for. I think they mentioned at one point they live for about 10,000 years.
Yeah, and at a certain point they no longer go into the host, they instead go into the pools, and it's like
Yeah, they
this
go
might
into
be
the pools for
memory
breeding.
beta. Well, that, but also I think eventually I think what happens, if I remember memory beta content correctly, it's like they get so huge they just can't move, and now they are just a repository of information that's cared for by even the smaller ones in the pool. It's so just like it's like biggest brain. Just you remember that 1 Billy and Mandy episode where the giant brain uh crash lands and Billy becomes his friend and helps it take over the world?
I don't. Maybe I do.
Okay. They
I
play a
kind of
little
do.
song when as he brings people to feed on
Oh, I
for it to feed
remember.
on the
I
bed.
remember. I
Yeah,
remember it
it's
now.
like
Yeah.
that basically, but less like horror.
Feed
It's just
me.
like feed
Yeah.
me, Billy.
There's also. Oh my god! Like you're reminding me of just like so. I don't know how long a symbiote can be. Like you said, they grow too large, so they probably just grow too large to physically fit in someone's body.
Hmm.
So it becomes a degree of like, yep, you're too large now. We're gonna put you in the pools to both like breed but also act as this font of knowledge. So the first thought I had is, you know, they kind of because they show this like weird ritual later on where Jadzia can like commune with other versions of her hosts. Like the host will
Hmm.
actually like possess another person's body so she can kind of like work with and commune with them.
Yeah.
And uh it's like, man, so that are they like I don't know if they're in there. Like I don't know if it's like because Star Trek has never been too far away from allowing magic in the setting. So I'm like,
Yeah.
is there soul inside the symbiote, or is it
So
literally just a copy of their
no,
memory?
yeah, well, it's the memory. Yeah, it's a copy of the memory because the original host died. So yeah, this is a copy of the memory, and it's transferred from the symbiote to whoever's going to host it. Now, how that works without scrambling the temporary host brain due to the way that memories actually work, I don't know. Don't
Well, yeah.
ask me.
I mean, it's also like it stores. It's not just their memories; it also stores their personality. Like I said, when they did that little.
Well, they make a point. One of them, the first one, the one who Kira has, she makes a point of what are we if not the sum of our memories? And if you know exactly how you reacted to everything in your life, and what those events were, why exactly would your personality be different by that logic? It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, it.
I don't disagree. I mean, that's obviously a more philosophical question. I guess I'm more pushing towards the idea of, and we're speaking to a future episode here, but there is a bit of a issue where one of the symbiote hosts who's possessing another person's body has a bit of a rebellious phase, and like their personality takes over a little bit too much, and they're like, yeah, I don't want to go back, and I'm like, okay, so like let's pause and like take a moment to ask how much is really stored in there. Like, so I'd like to imagine it's almost like a clear cut copy of the person. Like
Hmm.
it's not just like memory data
It's
storage. It's not
not
like just
simulacrum.
it's not
It's
it's not
them.
it's not like ones and zeros here. It's actually some sort of construct that is them, like stored. It's a lot more
It's like
complicated.
Tom Riker. Like
Yeah,
Tom Riker. Like
yeah,
at first, Tom Riker was the same as Will Riker. Now, of course, then their experiences made them diverge. But it's like, yeah, for all intents and purposes, they are one for one. They're not just like an imperfect copy. It's like full on, like, yeah. And then,
yeah. And what we end up kind of getting is imagine the existential horror, the copy of your existence now being stuck in this weird bug thing at the bottom of a pool for like 10,000 years.
oh yeah, it's terrifying. It's like an even worse form of Soma, where I've looked into
Yeah.
it. Like, I now know how that game ends. It's like, yep, 50-50. Are you the one who goes, or are you the one who stays? And it's
Yeah,
like, well,
Soma's
now
a
either way,
very
so
scary game.
yeah.
It's scary from the existential point, and that's what this kind of is.
And you're not even the original you there. Uh,
Yeah, it just,
gosh.
but it's also like, I mean, do we even know that? Because like when the symbiote only really leaves when the person dies. For all we know, it's like, ah, yes, we take the symbiote out, and it takes your consciousness
No,
with
no, no, no,
you
no, no. Remember, Curzon was still alive when they took it out. So at the very least,
for
Curzon,
like a few
one
moments.
Curzon.
For a few moments, he was alive.
Yeah, but that is a few moments where he is a separate entity from the Curzon in the symbiote. That is enough to know, like, yep, that one died. That one's alive. Yeah.
Well, even still, it's like Trill are weird, and I don't entirely like how they're implemented. I think they're a cool sci-fi concept. I just feel like if you were going to have a Trill in a Star Trek series, they would need to be. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but they would need to be like the Trill we meet later on in the series, in the final season. You know which one I'm referring to, where
Yeah.
she legitimately struggles with her entire nature and being to the point where it's not just a definitive upgrade. There's actually some drawback to it, and I think it's implemented very well because of that. Whereas
Hmm.
with Jadzia, and again, I like Jadzia like at her best. I just think there's a lot of situations where not even the writers really understand what kind of character they've made and the capabilities she should have.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
of course, this is all preamble to this episode really fucks with the perception of what Trill kind of are and the nature of their being to the point where
Yeah.
it very much obfuscates what it is that we should sort of view Jadzia as. So, I mean, that's where we can kind of begin. I don't want to go too like for some of our past episodes, and I don't think it's bad, but we've gone very like almost line by line, scene per scene. I think we can do that for some episodes, but we can kind of skip around a little bit more here because there's a lot we need to talk about that's not just directly related to the episode. Holy crap, there's a
Yeah.
lot. This episode's
Yeah.
not just bad because it screws with Trill. There's a court case in this episode, and as a
This
lawyer,
man's a
it hurts
lawyer.
me.
I studied political science and particularly international law. And Holmes can tell you at one point, I'm like, no, no, that's not how that works. You do not do that. You have violated all goodwill.
It's
Just,
now here's the thing. I'm not a big fan of court shows, court drama, stuff like that. The most I probably liked was My Cousin Vinny, and that's because it's mostly a comedy.
yeah.
So when it comes to like court stuff in media, it's rarely ever good. It's usually dramatized, it's usually edited, and that's fine. I don't have too much of an issue when it comes to well look, we
Wait,
need to make this entertaining. Courts are not entertaining except for some cases, but those are entertaining for different reasons, usually not related to the court stuff. You're talking about like
yeah.
defendants like exploding in the courtroom and you're like, "Oh my god." But here,
Yeah, it's not related to the court proceeding. Actually, a quick question, Hollowoods.
sure.
12 Angry Men, what's your opinion?
I like it. It's just kind of. It's first off, again, it's not really a court thing. There, it's all about witnesses in the witness room. Which, as an attorney, I
The
don't get to
jury.
see that. Jury, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, jury in the juror room, and as attorney, I never get to see that.
Okay. Okay, makes sense.
So it's almost I mentioned before, and this is a weird like discussion of law. So jurors are the ultimate fact finder, or they're or fact decider. They get to make the final decision, and in that nature, it's almost removed from the law. The law really more decides what information is allowed to be presented in court and what the standards are. But when it comes to the decision
Right.
of jurors, that is almost removed from the law. There's a reason why you don't have like professional jurors who are like studied in law. It's like you have like regular people So their decision is based on
Yeah.
what information is presented to them, and it's almost like a parallel procedure to what the law is. Because in theory, jurors
Yeah.
can just make whatever decision they want, regardless of what the
Yeah.
law
This is
says.
yeah, and that's both a strength and weakness of our system. It's like, hey, we
Yeah,
have the
we don't
ordinary
believe. Yeah,
man. Like,
we believe we believe uh, most lawyers believe that jurors are very much consistent with following the law because it's usually very well
yeah,
explained to them. At the same time, we don't know what discussions go on in juror rooms, so for the most part, it's like very rarely are you like not very rarely, but jurors can talk about stuff that happens after the case is concluded. But for the most part, like we don't really know what goes on in juror rooms when the jury's conversing, and at the same time, it's like it's meant to kind of be separate from the law and more of just like pure judgment. That's kind of what that's meant to
mhm,
be. But that being said, I do like 12 Angry Men. To me, it's a little boring. That's not really a mark
mm,
against the writing of it. I think the writing's actually phenomenal. You have 12 people who are all very distinct in their
yeah,
personalities, basically having to solve a problem. But if anyone said like, "Oh yeah, I found 12 Angry Men very boring," I'm like, "Yeah, I understand entirely why." It's it's
yeah.
that's all it is. It's 12 people having a
If it doesn't
conversation.
click for you, it's like makes perfect sense why. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. I was just
and
curious since you.
but like, so
Yeah.
here's the thing: when it comes to the depiction of a justice system in media, I understand that it's not going to reflect real life, and because again, it wouldn't be entertaining. That being
Yeah.
said, there should still be some sort of cognizant reasoning
It
for this
should
to
be
happen.
consistent.
Not just consistent, but it has to be logical. There has to be like, I see why this is the way it is. When it comes to the court trial we're going to see here, it makes no sense. It's very bad. And now it's presented as it's a Bajorn judge who's making the decision in this episode. So it's like, oh well,
Hmm.
couldn't it be consistent with Bajorn decisions? I don't believe the Bajorn people are that stupid. This process is stupid. Like this very much comes across as we have 40 minutes to have like two plots going on, an A and B plot, and one of these plots is a court one, so we don't have the time to actually make it work. It's like now I wanted to compare this to an episode from I think it's season 1 or season 2 of TNG, Measure of a Man, where they have a trial to determine the personhood of data. That's actually
Hmm.
fairly well done. Like I wouldn't say it's any way accurate of an actual court proceeding, but it is presented with a lot of like this is still very logical. I understand what's going on here. There's one really dumb thing in that episode, but for the most part, like I look at that and I think, you know what, this is fine. This is entertaining enough. This is believable enough. I can see this being a procedure that exists and people would agree to. Here I cannot.
Hmm.
I cannot agree.
Hmm.
I don't think anyone would see what's going on in here and think, "Oh, these people are having a court hearing." It's like, no, no, no. It really much just comes across as people who have no idea how the law works. Or
Yeah.
not just the law works. They have no idea how to come to a just and fair decision. So
Yeah.
that's why, like, okay, but like, let's actually get into it because, you know, we're kind of talking around a point where anyone listening is going to be incredibly confused as to what we're talking about. So the the episode opens up with Bashir and Dax flirting. Again, it's just more of that stuff that's like, hey, Bashir really does like Dax, and it also shows uh, let's see, does Dax say anything about like her ancestry? Oh well, let's see. No, she really doesn't talk about it. It's like it's kind of just this is Julian flirting with Dax, and we see
Yeah.
somebody sort of hiding in the shadows who is like they have like a weird. Let's see if I can get like an image of them. Hold on, VLC. Here we go. And we see this guy hiding in the shadows, watching Dax. And when Dax leaves, he follows.
Hmm.
And this is where we get to the first really dumb part. So Jadzia's walking in the
Uh.
hallway. This guy walks up to her and he asks, "You are Dax?" Uh, and she says, "Yeah." Now, he immediately sicks his guards on her. And we're like, wait, what the hell's going
Yep.
on? Bashir intervenes. They fight. Bashir gets his butt kicked. He's outnumbered, so I don't have an issue with that. And, like, they basically knock Dax out, take her to a ship. Bashir wakes up and he calls Cisco saying, like, oh, someone kidnapped Dax. Cisco and the bridge crew basically ground any ship to try and figure out which ship they're going to. Because
Hmm.
Dax, they specifically take off Dax's communicator, which
Yeah.
again, I'm actually kind of okay with that. If you're kidnapping someone in Starfleet,
You want
you're
to
like,
remove any way for
yeah,
them to, yeah,
we know this is how they track them. They can transport them. Remove that, and they get that information from Bashir. He's like, yeah, they took her badge off, so that's not going to be helpful to find her. So they basically look at all the ships that are capable of like warp 5 and lock them all down. And in doing so, this allows them to properly capture this group. And let's see, yeah, there's a scene where Odo basically corners them. He says, yeah, walk out with your extremities up. And they basically get these people and they get Dax back. I'm actually kind of okay with this scene as is. It has a lot of characters acting logical to a point where
hmm
they're operating in a way that makes sense. The bridge crew is making deductions based on limited information and
yeah,
what they need to do. I think this is actually a pretty almost decently well done action scene. Not I said I mean it's well done. I don't mean it's almost well done. It's a well done kind of almost action scene. That's what I
y-
mean. It's a pretty good opening scene. I like it.
yeah. My
And
problems isn't with the crew and such. It's with
it's what
what
happens
we,
next.
yeah, and like
So
why they did this. Yeah.
we find out that these individuals are part of. Let's see if we can find what exactly what was the system they're in. I gotta like go all the way down in the transcript here. Uh, okay, so they are from Kaelstron 4 in charge of extradition procedures. Cisco's like, extradition? It's like, I call this kidnapping and assault because, again, they corner Dax in a hallway, beat her up into unconsciousness, and then drag her to their ship.
Yeah, this is not how extradition works, folks. Just so you know, you even if you catch them in another country, you best hope A, you've got extradition treaty, and B, you took them into custody properly according to that extradition treaty, or you had someone from their law enforcement do it. It is just, oh my god, all of this is just like, yep, that's a no extradition right here.
Yeah.
Just because,
And yeah, and it's then he hands them a valid warrant for her arrest. Uh let's see. The relevant treaty between Clangston 4 and your federation allows for unilateral extradition. All right. And Cisco asks, like, what's the charge? The fugitive Dax is charged with treason and the murder of my father. We get some, like, it sort of has a dramatic fadeaway there. To preface this, Dax is the one on the treaty, not Jadzia, because they're referring to Curzon Dax when it comes
yeah.
to this. And they are arresting her. That's why they kind of had to confirm her identity. I don't even really like how they confirm her identity. I guess they asked around, and the last thing he does is he's like, "Are you Dax?" And she's like, "Yes." But I'm not gonna lie, the way that's presented is like it almost sounds like she's saying yes, as in like yes, like I'm talking to you, but I don't know what you're saying. Like it happens so quickly that I can imagine someone like if I walked up to someone behind like them and I just started saying stuff and they said yes,
Yeah.
they might not have actually heard me. They might just be saying yes almost in reflex.
Yeah, plus there's also the fact of like, so they're going off the fact this is a case of like human perspective, like and like how does it apply to Trill? How do children get their last name if they're the child of a host? Is it still like do they take the original name of the host, or do
Um,
they take the
well,
symbiote's name? Because
do I don't know if Troll even have last names.
Jadzia Dax, and I
Well, Dax is
know
the name of the
the
symbiote.
future. Well, yeah, but I know for a fact Esri has one before she gets her
Oh,
symbiote. Uh, yeah, we meet her
anyway,
family and such. Yeah,
okay.
it's
So
like
I mean, I guess it's just like I don't know. Maybe that's just one of the procedures. Is like yeah, like if you're again, like, let's just assume that the last name follows the father, not the mother. I don't know what Troll do, but let's just assume it's the father.
yeah,
Like if you get the name, I guess they would just use the previous family name.
yeah, okay. Well, I was just wondering because it's like if it's not that, and instead you would take the symbiote's name. It's like wait, well, like I was thinking, like wouldn't there be an issue of like, oh, you identified based only on the last name? What if this was just a child of Dax? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I just
But
don't think I don't think it works because I don't think he does enough to confirm this. Because from the way it's presented, is he asks, "Are you Dax?" So he's like,
yeah.
maybe he's like 90% sure, and there's a 10% he's unsure about. That seems to be enough for him to be like, "Okay, it's 100%. Let's grab her." And then it's like, well, I mean, I don't feel like that was enough confirmation. I'd be a little bit more concerned. Are you Dax? And she's like, yes, I'm Dax. Like, okay, so you're the symbiote Dax, and I don't know. I'd be a little bit more if you're trying to have any sort of professionalism here, which they're not, I would have been a little
Yeah.
bit more careful. So
Yeah.
then we have Odo looking over the warrants. It says that Dax is responsible for the death of General Ardelon Tandro 30 years ago, and that's when Cisco's like, wait a minute, this would have been Curzon then, because Jadzia is 28.
Yeah.
And let's see, apparently Curzon was a mediator on there during their civil war. Let's see. Da-da-da. So so Cisco talks about how Curzon tended to be a little bit cavalier in life. He had more faults than usually acceptable Trill, but he wasn't a murderer. Uh, Odo's a little bit more suspicious here. He's actually kind of like, well, let's what is this government doing here? And Cisco's being a lot more defensive of Curzon, so you have good perspectives here, but they're both like listening
Hmm.
to each other, so I do like that. And Cisco's like, look, this is nonsense, Constable. I'm telling you, I know the man. And then Odo's like, yeah, but do you know the symbiote inside the man? I mean, this is again where
Mm.
we have kind of this issue where how much of a personality is the symbiote really going to have? Because again, like Jadzia seems fully in control of her own personality, right? We never met her before she became a symbiote, but it sounds like the
Hmm.
process of becoming, or no, before she became a host for symbiote, it sounds like the process of becoming a host is to train you how to maintain your sense of identity.
Yeah.
So I guess that would mean we never really see the raw personality of the host. But it's sort of like what you said before, where one of the hosts is like, yeah, isn't your personality more of an amalgamation of all your memories, forming you as a person? It's like, okay, by that logic, the like Curzon is now one portion of that thing's personality,
Yeah.
and every day a little bit more of Jadzia probably shapes its personality. And at the same time, it's like it just feels like a weird thing to sort of add on to it. And again,
Mm.
it really does begin to question how much independence do these Trill have from the symbiote who has, I guess, some degree of control over how they think and feel? Like, the
Hmm.
implication here is Odo saying, like, yeah, you knew Curzon the man, but do you know the symbiote? It's like, well, first off, like, does that imply the symbiote could have done this outside of Curzon's influence? Or it would have
Mm.
influenced Curzon in some way to do something that Cisco believes Curzon would never have done? I don't know if that's the
Yeah.
case. That sounds like it's not the case. Like it sounds like that
Yeah.
wouldn't be the case. So the fact that they're implying it is a little bit like sus in terms of what exactly is the implication here. Like, is this like a body snatcher situation where, yeah, in reality, the symbiote just wipes the personality of the new person? Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't really know. Is it like the Borg? We're basically adding your distinctiveness to our own. I
And you're
mean,
just subsumed completely, and it's like, oh well,
imagine
you're
like the Borg capture the Trill, and like, you're like a mini Borg. You
a
go
mini.
from person to person and take the best parts of them and keep going. It's like, oh, jeez.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Like.
yeah, and let's see. So we have the situation where they're discussing the warrant. Let's see. The next scene is in Dax's quarters, and Cisco and Dax are having a conversation, and I don't like this scene either. So Cisco's talking about how like he can stall the extradition. I'm going to help you. You've got to help. It's like, look, like Dax is not being really responsive, and Cisco's like, look, if I'm going to help you, you're going to have to help me. And Dax is like, I don't need any help, Benjamin. Thank you though. Cisco's like, are you crazy? These people want to put you to death. Like, uh, I guess the charge would be the death penalty. Like, is worthy of
Yeah.
the death
Death
penalty.
penalty.
And Dax keeps saying like, no, Benjamin, don't help me. And let's see. Cisco's like, yeah, we got 18 to 20 years of friendship between us. And then Dax like, I'm Jadzia Dax now. That was Curzon you knew for 20 years. So let's
Mm.
see. Oh yeah, and Cisco's like, so when the Dax part of you survived, it didn't take the friendship along. And she's like, you know, Benjamin, you're still my a very dear friend to me. I'm sorry. She's being very distant and not helping here when Cisco's trying to help. And this is
Yeah.
this is part of this is my issue. So first off, we are in episode. What episode is this?
8.
Okay, so they have had now every season of Star Trek is about a year.
Yeah. About a year.
Yeah, they portray it as about a year. So TNG goes on for about 7 years. It's acknowledged in
Hmm.
universe, and there are about 22 episodes per season. So
Hmm.
every episode has an implied few weeks between them. Like
Yeah.
this is just how you have to kind of look at it. That means that these two have known each other. If this is episode 8, that means these two have known each other
Pretty
for
much.
about 16 weeks.
Oh yeah, you right.
So they've known each
Sorry.
other for about 16 weeks. I don't know. You could be decent friends by then. But also, there's another issue here. Jadzia, you're a Starfleet officer. He is your commander. Like, he has
Also,
responsibility over you.
there's also the fact of like, hey, you have a responsibility to that symbiote to keep it alive. Take
Yeah,
every.
that's another thing. Because they make a point later on. What they want is Dax. They don't want they don't want Jadzia, and they make a point that if they could have removed the symbiote, they would have done it. But the point is,
Mhm.
once I believe they mentioned after like 2 weeks with the symbiote inside you, the body becomes dependent on the symbiote, and you can't remove it anymore. Like they become so intertwined that they can't be
Yeah,
separated without death of the host.
yeah,
So, like, they would basically say like, look, if we could remove the symbiote, we would do that, but that would just kill the host anyway. So they don't want Jadzia, and you're right. Like Jadzia has a responsibility to keep this alive to the point where they've actually made multiple points in the series. I believe in the first episode we see Trill. They're willing to let the host die if it means saving the symbiote. Like their society is
yeah,
willing to let the host die, and that's another huge red flag for this like society. You're willing to let hosts die to save the symbiote. This sounds like a very servitude relationship between you two. This
yep,
isn't like symbiotic. This is like parasitic.
yeah, yeah,
So like this is why I jokingly call the symbiote like the parasite, just because like that's kind of what it is. When it comes down to it, like the society itself is like no 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 keep the symbiote alive even at the cost of the host. I believe the episode in TNG is someone who wants to be a host or is a host. They're dying, and the Federation or
yeah. They have to.
the Enterprise crew is trying to save them, but the 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 Trill like ambassadors are like, we need to remove the symbiote now. If we continue, the symbiote will be put in danger. We don't care if it kills the host. So it's a very
Yeah,
dark sort of reality. And here's the thing, again, I can fully imagine a society where it's like when you become a symbiote host, you are told your life is secondary to to the symbiote. You understand that. Like,
yeah.
and people can agree to it. I'm okay with people agreeing to it. It's still a little fucked up.
Oh yeah, it is very much just
It very
like
much comes across as
is
Stockholm syndrome. Like,
yeah.
yes, we love our the species we have become dependent upon. We love them. It's like, okay then.
This
Like
is
slowly backs away,
interesting.
understands that your society is
Yeah,
probably run by these symbiotes and they probably push policy to further their goals. Ugh.
yep,
But
yeah,
so for some reason, Jadzia is allowing herself to basically be like steamrolled. And now I want to get to the point where we're trying to talk about. I think you brought this up when we first watched the episode. Shouldn't the failure to execute this extradition treaty invalidate it?
yeah. It's like well, at the very least, it's like the so. Here's the thing, everyone, you're going to get a quick crash course in extradition law. So, unless there is a treaty in place between two states, extradition is pretty much a no go. Like they do not
Yes.
have to return a person. Now there could be cases where it's like, so in America, if we find out, we catch someone doing a crime and they're a foreigner, and it's like, oh well, in that case, we'll deport you. It's they just happen to be a criminal in their home country. It might be a case of like they might arrange something, but it's like that's just happenstance of like, hey, we're getting rid, we don't want them here. You take them back. Cool. We're putting them in custody because they're one. And it's like, cool, fine. But generally speaking, you need some sort of treaty in place. Like for example, America and the UK have a extradition treaty, and if I recall, it's actually one that people really don't like because the US and like it's very one sided in favor of the US. I haven't read it all, but it's like yeah, I can get why that might be annoying. But it's very much these treaties will set out codes, procedures, like what crimes can be, person be returned for and such, and like what might be off limits, that sort of thing. If you go outside of that extradition treaty, it is very much like a red button sort of thing of like, yep,
It would be an
you have
international issue.
like, yeah, it's actually historically this actually came up when Israel was hunting down the Nazis who went into hiding. They very much did it off the books, like did not tell any of the countries because it's like, yeah, we don't have treaties with them, and they are happy to harbor them. We've got we're gonna deal with them in that country. And it's like, oh, you're gonna tell them after the fact? No, we do not want to deal with it. Like we just want those like these war criminals dead, right? And it's like
Yeah.
yeah, that's the sort of thing. And what these guys have basically done is that of like, we have this what we I so
I
I
guess.
don't
Well,
think he
actually,
would
it's
like.
even worse than that because, like, here's the thing: when it comes to if you have no extradition treaty with a country and one of your like a huge criminal is there, again, like you brought up with Israel versus like Nazis, it's like
Yeah,
okay,
like
like I can understand based on the context why you'd be like, fuck the laws, we're going to get
yeah,
this guy.
yeah,
Now, hold on.
yeah.
Here's the thing though.
It's a
My thing is,
Nazi.
they
Yeah,
probably
it's a
they
Nazi hiding in Argentina. Yeah, get him. It's like,
well that's the
um,
thing though. These guys in the episode, not only do they try and abduct Jadzia, when they're caught, they're then saying, but we actually have a valid extradition treaty. It's like,
if
wait a
you
minute,
have
hold
the
on.
warrant presented, present
Well,
it.
it's not even that. They're then acting as if they didn't try and abduct her. They are basically
Yeah,
saying, like, look, we have a warrant. We were allowed to do that. And, we get to a scene in a little bit that justifies why this might have happened. But it's actually absurd. This is like you get caught with your hand in the cookie jar and then say, but I'm entitled to the cookies. It's like, no,
yeah.
no, no. You violated. At least with the case you brought up with real life, it's like, I don't think they would have said, well, we're entitled to it. It's like, no, no, no. They didn't give a shit. Like, they didn't know. They'd
Yeah,
be like, we don't have a
yeah.
law that allows this.
It's
So,
yeah. It's
no,
even
go on.
worse because it's like oh crap, what was I going to say? So they imply that this is all on board. If the Federation signed any sort of treaty that could reasonably justify the kidnapping, I would like as a Federation citizen just be like, okay, so you sold us out. Like it is so just like whole because this is just like this is just state backed kidnapping, and it could just be any. It's like we have an O'Brien Must Suffer episode later on where he's kidnapped by the Cardassians, right, and put on trial for a supposed crime, right?
Yeah.
Imagine if that is basically what happens there, and everyone's kind of pissed about it because it's just like it's just like the Kardashians don't have a treaty like that, and everyone's pissed that they did that. Now imagine if supposedly like, oh, we're doing this all on board, like above board here. Imagine if that was actually in the treaty that these guys signed with the Federation. It's like me as a Federation citizen, I'd be like, how? Why are my rights being violated this way for
Well, yeah.
just like,
And again,
oh my
it's
god.
mostly so the issue I have here is you can do this one of two ways. If you don't believe you can extradite a person, but you feel entitled to do so, kind of like in real life, you do it anyway,
Yeah,
just off the books. I'm not saying it's morally good, but what I am saying is like, okay, well, you the person doing it would be fully aware of we don't care that we're violating the law. We're trying to see justice done. That's sort of the mentality, and I
yeah,
can understand that mentality as a concept.
yeah,
And then there's the other way where it's like, look, the law doesn't support us, so we have to go through alternative like okay, so we need to actually like work within the law, work within the governments to make this extradition treaty work within law. That's another
yeah,
circumstance. Here,
yeah.
it's like they
These
break the
guys
law and
had
then
a
say they're
treaty.
mad that they break the law, and then when they get caught, they just say, but the law supports us anyway, so just let us do that and ignore the fact that we tried to kidnap somebody. They want their cake, they want to have their cake and eat it too,
Yeah,
and it comes across as like, no, no, no. The Federation would probably not only banish, like you'd be like not allowed to enter Federation space, but your planet would probably be sanctioned or somehow fined. I don't know how the Federation necessarily deals with some of these issues. And then
yeah,
if there isn't a valid arrest warrant for an extradition, it would probably need to be reevaluated. And this would become
yeah.
a
Because
huge
if you're willing to
international
do
incident.
it that way,
And
like,
it's even worse
like,
because Jadzia is part of another planet. Like the yes, the Trill planet is within the Federation, but do you think the Trill planet is not going to try and get involved? You tried to kidnap one of
yeah,
our people. Holy
yeah.
shit.
It's like it's basically a European Union sort of situation where it's like, yeah, you're dealing with both the European Union as a whole, but also the individual state. Because I am absolutely certain that every member state, it has to be negotiated what exactly their like position. Like, there's probably broad general categories in the Federation, but then there's individual treaties
It
setting
probably
up.
depends on how much power and influence you have. There might be a lot of
Yeah,
planets that are basically not subservient to the Federation, but like the point is, if you want to join the Federation, you sign on the dotted line and you don't get to negotiate the terms. Meanwhile,
yeah,
a force like the Vulcans, who are one of the founding members, if they want to change
yeah.
policy, they probably have the influence to do so.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely. That's what
now
I'm
here,
trying.
yeah,
It's like,
and here's just the final thing that I think is just it's such an issue, but this really should be like Cisco kicks these people off the station. It's like, I'm not hearing it. You want to do this? You go to the Federation Council and you request it from them. Then you wait
yeah,
however long that's going to take for you to request it, and then however long it takes you to make your case, and then they need to come all the way out here to the frontier, and that's when what happens in the next scene, but also what happened there is he throws the Bajoran card in. He says, "This is actually a Bajoran station on Bajoran space. We're not technically in the Federation. Jadzia is a Federation
hmm.
officer, but we're not in the Federation." Because in the next
Yeah,
scene,
you committed a crime
Yeah,
here by trying to kidnap her in the
yeah.
Jordan space
Well,
on a
that's the thing. It gets so much worse. So Tanjiro and Cisco are having a conversation where she's like, you received your confirmation. Give me my prisoner. Like again, he's acting super entitled, and Cisco is just like, nah, bro. Like we're not doing that. Like get out. And let's see, Kira's also there, and Cisco basically like lets Kira take over. Kira asks, "How do you know your way around the station so well?" And he's like, uh, "My conversation is with the commander." Cisco's like, "Nope, it's with my first officer now." And she says, "The Kalestrans are allies with the Cardassians." This is
Here we
like
go.
holy. Like here's the thing, Cardassia is an enemy. Admittedly, there's a current treaty between them, but Cardassia is an enemy of the Federation. These guys are
Like,
allies
yeah,
to Cardassians. How did you
yeah.
think this was tolerable? Oh my! Like
They didn't. They just
it's
assumed
absolutely.
they
Here's the
could
thing.
cowboy it.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? While Jadzia is not a member of Bajor, she is a Federation officer permitted to be stationed like here in Bajor. I don't
Yeah,
think Bajorans would want an ally of the Cardassians able to unilaterally extradite and or abduct people from their sector of space.
yeah.
So Bajorans immediately get involved, and I'm not gonna lie, this is where the episode kind of should have ended because the Bajorans are like, "All right, we've summarily made the decision. No."
Yeah.
Like
It's
it's like,
like,
I'm sorry, hold on. Go tell your spoonhead buddies that we said no." Like,
oh my God, Hollis, you can't say that, even if it's just role playing Bajorans.
look, I'm
We're gonna
sorry,
get
I'm
canceled.
sorry, but it just this is where sometimes when you watch Star Trek, it's really satisfying to watch characters act in incredibly logical and realistic ways. Again,
Hmm.
one of the things I liked about the start of this episode, they removed Jadzia's badge. They took Jadzia away. They don't know exactly where she is. So what do? All right, lock down every ship that has the capability of getting away from us. Like not every ship, right? Just every ship that has the capability of escaping this station. Like if you
Hmm.
leave and you have subwarp 5, it's like, okay, well our runabouts can follow you, so we don't have to worry about that. So
Hmm.
it's like, okay, lock down every ship that has warp 5. That is entirely logical. It makes sense. It is like it's such a great, satisfying like sequence. But then you have
Hmm.
this where it's just this is so stupid. And I just again, this is one of those things where this episode struggles with the political and legal concepts that it wants to make the primary focus. I think the B plot is more or less okay. I kind of like the idea of the B plot, but
Hmm.
so much of character and world building and plot is just ruined by this whole thing. Again, you also have Jadzia not cooperating with Cisco here. And we know
Yeah.
why Jadzia is not doing it. At the same time, like that doesn't mean she shouldn't be trying to survive herself. So, well, it'll be revealed later. But the reason Jadzia is allowing herself to be like turned over, or she wants to allow herself to be turned over, and Cisco's not allowing it. But the reason that Jadzia is allowing herself to be turned over is because she believes it'll help hide a secret that is why she's being arrested. She's being arrested because of a secret that she's keeping.
Y-
So
yeah, the
the
truth
episode,
of
yeah,
how
the
someone
tr- yeah,
died.
the episode tries to present it as in like by turning herself over, she's making sure the secret is safe. When that's not the case, like
Yeah,
she could
yeah,
still be like, okay, I'm not going to reveal why I shouldn't be arrested, but what I am going to do is I'm going to hide behind the Bajoran law enforcement.
yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you're mad about that. So it's Jadzia is acting very illogical in this way, and it just really hurts this whole episode. It's pretty
Yep,
bad. And here's the thing: there's one or two good things I really do like in this episode, but God, so much of it's just really dumb. Um,
yep.
we get a fun little scene. It's very small where Odo is like in the bar, and like Quark is asking him about like what's going on with Jadzia, like because I guess it would be the talk of the station, and Odo is
He wants to
basically
bank.
like Odo's like there's nowhere suitable on the station to hold the trial, which I mean it's a big station. I feel like you'd have plenty of places to hold it, but all right.
Actually, I did find a note about this on the wiki. So the reason why they don't have another place is they just haven't built one yet. They actually build one, I think in season 3 or 4, because later we have another trial sort of thing, and that's the one they use.
I
But
think you mean they haven't
yeah,
built it in real life. They didn't have a set for it.
well, yeah, that's what I mean. They're just like,
Yeah,
yeah, this is just them
I, I'm
hand
I'm
waving.
I'm criticizing it from a world building perspective. I'm like, this is a big station. How do you not
Yeah,
have a like? And here's the thing:
it was
what we end up
run by
needing.
Kardashians too. Like, come on.
Well, one thing we need, and one thing that's like they don't even need that much space. So I'm kind of like questioning it here, but whatever.
Yeah.
So that being said, Odo's in here and he's sort of like chilling, and then he's like, you know, that wall's gonna have to come out in about 5 meters. And Quark's like, what are you talking about? And of course, after you move that, you'll have to remove the entire second level of Hollow Suites. And Quark's like, what's going on? And Odo's like, new restrictions, new building codes the provisional government are putting in place. Uh, and then Quark quickly understands what's going on here. It's like, you're blackmailing me. And Odo's like, it's just business. And business is
Yeah.
business. So Odo is being like, here's the thing. I think the acting and like character interactions here are so much fun. At the same time, like this feels like again, this is a very simplified way of their interaction. It's entirely one-sided. Odo just comes in, curb stomps Quark because he's like, "Oh, I have all the cards." I'm like, "Okay, that's not interesting then." I think the most interesting
Yeah.
parts are when there's like this back and forth. Odo says something, but then Quark
Who
sort of
can weasel
responds.
who?
Yeah. Well, it's like it almost would be like you'd almost want a situation where how the scene actually goes is Odo's like, yeah, well, there's these new restrictions, and Quark says, oh, well, you know what? I, as the community leader of this station, I'm going to get all the other sort of like stores and restaurants and shops here to unify against you. So good luck enforcing those restrictions, buddy. Like the idea is
Mm,
like Quark sort of claps back, like he says, you might have these restrictions, but we're just not going to listen to you, and we outnumber you.
hmm
And then Odo somehow responds with something else that counters that. And then ultimately,
hmm
you can have the scene end with Odo winning and getting like what he needs. And what it should be, right, is Quark over the course of this conversation learns why Odo is doing this. They want to use this bar for the space for Jadzia's trial, and then Quark says, "All right, you know what? I'll just let you use the space for free." And Odo's maybe a little bit surprised, really, for free. And then like Quark kind of leans in and is like, "Do what you can to help her." Give us a nice
Yeah.
character
Yeah.
moment with Quark, but also at the same time, like have it play off each's character traits. And it's just
hmm
again, remember, Quark is like romantically attracted to Jadzia. If she dies, he can't hit that. So that could be his real
Yeah.
motivation, right? Like he's like, look, I'm not really a nice guy. I just want every opportunity to get Umlock from her.
Umlach. Umlach.
But it's just it's a weak scene. It's not like bad, right? It's just kind of like, all right. I mean, this is just a scene to get the room that we need to have the trial in because we need to justify to use the use of this room. And I'm like, all right, sure. I mean, it's just weird. And like, I mean, I thank you for bringing up that like fact where they just didn't have a set built for it yet because that explains it. The
Yeah.
reason we have this scene is we need to justify the fact that we have to use Quark's bar to do this.
Yep. hmm
So that's I mean that is what it is, but it's just kind of annoying. Let's see, and then
hmm
the next scene we have, let's see, it's Odo and Cisco on the. Let's see, so they have a place for the hearing. Let's see, I've been able to get a word up to. I thought someone might be. Oh, so this is where he starts asking Odo to do an investigation into the situation.
hmm
He's like, "Look, I need someone to like get me the facts because Dax is not cooperating." Odo's like, "Look, the case is 30 years of dust covering it. The extradition hearing will take about 30 minutes." And Cisco's like, "I'm hoping it'll take a little bit longer than that." Odo's like, "Oh, good luck." But the implication here is Odo's going to go do some investigations, and
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I guess that's fair. I do again. I greatly question this. Odo's the constable for this station. Do you think he would be just okay going to do an investigation in another system?
So I think the fact of like because this crime of like the kidnapping happened on his station, right? He
Yeah,
now needs to know, why did this kidnapping happen in the first place? And it's like, oh, well, there's the question of, is, Jadzia, like, what Curzon guilty of this crime? It's like, well, to find out and see if, like, what the punishment for, like, basically it's like he needs all the facts so that he can write the report at the end of the day that he has to
yeah,
give. Now he probably has people who are prepared to, like, like,
yeah. Take over his
to handle
responsibilities.
things. Yeah, he can delegate. He likes to be in command of it, but he can delegate long enough to, like, go handle this.
But I'm not gonna
It,
lie here. It's immediately an issue because remember, Odo is a member of the Bajoran security force,
mm.
and he is going to a planet that is allied with Cardassians. Like,
Yes, but Odo doesn't necessarily, like, remember, Odo is interested in justice
no, no, no.
ultimately.
I'm not saying that's. I'm not saying it's an issue with Odo. I'm saying it's an issue with
Mhm.
why would the planet allow him on their surface?
So basically, the statement can just be made of, like, oh, you're not allowing us to investigate this. Cool, extradition denied.
True,
Like,
that could be the situation. I feel like we should have gotten a scene about that. Something that explains,
yeah,
part of the extradition treaty allows us an independent investigation. So,
yeah.
Odo is the independent investigator, and it's just kind of like they just kind of ignore that and say, "Yep, go to the planet and investigate." I'm like, can you just do that? Can you just go to another planet, like go
Mm,
through, I guess, their customs, land on their planet, and start investigating things? It's like I don't know if you'd be allowed to do that, especially if you're not an ally. Which, again, I guess they have
right.
an extradition treaty and it's allowed in that, but they're an ally with Cardassia, and guess what? Odo, not a member of the Federation, so he wouldn't be allowed to be in this like thing. I guess again, maybe this is the Federation is allowing a third party to investigate for them, and maybe that's allowed in
Yeah,
the extradition treaty. But
there's
again,
also the fact of the case they have has a Bajoran. What do they call her? It's not a judge. They use a stupid term for it.
well, yeah,
Uh,
they don't like yeah they have a Bajoran judge, but they don't have a So they do call her a judge, I think. But oh, Madam Arbiter.
yeah, arbiter. Okay. Which, hey, that's actually, they get that from Cardassians.
Oh, really?
Cardassians use arbiter. Yeah, they.
Maybe.
I remember. Yeah, so it might just be like, yeah, a similar thing of just like, yeah, when they set this up, they kept a lot of the terms and such in place in terms of the legal system. Huh.
Well, I mean, but either way, it's like you'd have. I feel like there should have been a scene where it's mentioned. Yes, the Federation is allowed to quote unquote hire a unaffiliated third party to investigate for them, because
Hmm.
otherwise, this is a Bajoran agent who is going to a planet that does not have any sort of alliance or treaty with Bajor to go investigate something entirely like 30 years old. I'm like, I don't know if you'd be allowed to do that. But anyway, it's
Yeah.
just it's a questionable. It's a little questionable, but again, I guess it could technically work. So,
Hmm.
and again, this is happening at such a breakneck pace. We're already at a trial. Like
Yeah.
this would be
Yeah.
months and months of prep. Not to mention, it's like we don't know. Like Cisco says, he can try and stall so that Odo has time to investigate. But the way it's presented, it very much feels like this is all happening over the course of like 3 days.
Yeah.
Again,
It's like, no,
it's
that's not
super
how it
weird.
works.
And
Even
then
extradition treaties, like, I mean, hearings take a long time.
and
Yeah.
it's just it's so this is incredibly weirdly written, very poorly written in a lot of this parts. Again, this is really the first bad episode of DS9. So we have the judge, Madam Arbiter. Her name's Renora. Okay, but I'm just gonna call her Judge Lady. And so the first thing I hate, she's like, "This will be an informal hearing." No, it will fucking not. This
No,
is
it's
here's the thing.
formal.
If this
You're
was
making it.
here's the thing. You could have informal hearings that are like preliminaries. Like, okay, the judge is like, this is an informal hearing. You're gonna like state the parties involved. We're gonna make sure everything's on the up and up, and then in 3 weeks we'll have an actual trial. Right? Like this
Yeah.
could be one of the many steps in the way. This would essentially be similar to maybe an arraignment or something
Mhm.
where you're basically just establishing, are these the charges that are levied against you? Are you, do you agree, do you plead guilty or not guilty? If you say guilty, then we're allowing you to, the guilt will be decided. If you say not guilty, then like, okay, well now we're going to have a trial. So this seems like it would be the closest to an arraignment, but That's not
Hmm.
what it's presented as. This is presented as the definitive trial. So
Hmm.
this is again really dumb. She's like, this is an informal hearing. Again, no, I want to slap this woman. So I'm going to
Hmm.
start with some informal advice. Again, I guess that's a fun line. I'm 100 years old. I do not have time to squander listening to superfluous language. In short, I intend being here until supper, not senility. Understood? So again, this is a judge saying, I don't care what the situation is. Make it short and sweet. I'm like, this is someone's life on the line.
Yeah, like this is like I get like saying like don't engage in flowery bullshit. Give me the facts of this case and sort of deal of like, but don't say make it short and sweet. It's like no, that won't cover all the facts in
Well, it's like,
detail.
in
Like
short, she wants to be here till supper. She wants this to be a few hours at most. And maybe it's
yeah,
a
that's
turn of phrase. Maybe it's a turn of phrase. At the same time, like, I'm sorry, writers. The law is the law, and it's going to be lengthy. And sometimes that superfluous language is necessary to make a point or to have the law be understood as it should be. So
yeah,
it's like this is a kangaroo court. This is a rushed justice. This is
yeah,
absolutely horrible. And unironically, I think this is just like a Bajoran judge who's like, I don't care what the Federation and this random planet are doing. What the hell's a trill? Whatever. I want to be here till supper. The secret is that this woman's just evil. like
well,
uh
to be fair, she's a judge. Uh,
anyway, so her first point is, you seek extradition, make your case. I guess this is kind of appropriate. The prosecution in this case, Tandro, the person who's trying to extradite her, he would go first in an opening statement.
mhm.
He talks about the accused Trill, whatever the appearance may be, was and is a Federation officer who committed capital crimes on our planet. Since there is no time limit on the prosecution of such crimes, uh,
The
hold on.
judge
No, yeah,
interrupts.
she
Uh,
interrupts and she's like, I've read the warrant and charges. The crimes described are 30 years old. What took so long? He's like, look, they were in military files that were just sealed up until recently. I'm like, first off, why did you say give me the point and then interrupt him? You wouldn't do that as a judge.
yeah,
Like, I
yeah.
mean,
This is
I'm thinking of American legal system here. At the same time, if you had just shut up, he would have made his point.
yeah.
There's no time limit on these prosecutions, and even though it's been 30 years, we've just uncovered the evidence. If you had just not talked, you would have probably gotten that information. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
and
it's
then
one of those
there's
things
the
where I don't think it's fair, right? Like the whole point is, oh, I want to be here for a short time. Guy tries to make his case, you interrupt him. I'm like, I, I would not. If I was him, I'd have been like, excuse me, judge, I'm going to restart my claim because I am trying to make a point here. Again,
yeah,
this is a little bit again
yeah.
this is
Like
just
this
not
is
this is
very
not a
much
court.
just like unprofessional. It's unprofessional on the judge's part. Well,
Yeah.
arbitrator's part. And there's also the fact of like once he said like answers the question, the evidence was contained in military files, which were officially sealed until recently. She just says, "Fine, sit." And it's like, well, what if he had other things to say, like to make his case? It's like he didn't finish. Like
So I
I,
mean, the best we can say is, um, let's see, yeah, because she says make your case, right? Like
yeah.
it's not just like give me a quick rundown of what you're trying to say. No, it's like he's trying to make his case. Now, the actually, let's see if I can. I don't know if it's fully come up yet, but there is something I do want to. Oh yeah, it has the stupid gavel. It's a ball.
Ah, the ball. Yeah, I looked on Memory Alpha about this, and they're like, yeah, we had to make something that was different from the human gavel. It's like, yeah, but could you have made it like, I don't know, a cube at least? Something that doesn't roll?
Yeah, because it
Like,
requires a special stand.
yeah, it's so stupid.
Like
Like,
this is very silly. So like you know, again, this is what we were talking about before, where you want when you're writing a court system, it doesn't need to be accurate to the American court system. When you're writing a like a legal drama, right? You need to have some degree of accuracy, but as long as it makes sense, I don't necessarily fault it for being legally inaccurate. Because the point
hmm
is you're trying to have a narrative about this. And sometimes that requires, to make it interesting, a little bit of flowery use of the law. It's like, yeah, we totally have surprise witnesses and all those sorts of things, which would never happen, but it makes for fun drama. So,
well,
what I mean, well,
uh,
just to quickly finish my point, is when you're talking about like, okay, well, we want to make something that these aliens do, so it's neat and interesting, so it's foreign but familiar. When you say we want a ball that you put on this pedestal and then you bang the ball, that's just illogical. Like you said, make it a
mhm.
cube, I guess. I mean,
Like, yeah, if you
it's the same thing where we actually see this later. Bajorans, like I need to somehow describe this. They clap by slapping the back of their hand to one of their palms instead of their palm to palm. And while that
uh, I,
works to make a noise, right? It's like okay, it's like that makes a
yeah,
noise. Hopefully the mic picks it up and it didn't just explode it. But
no,
I
I can
tried
do
to.
it right now. I can do it for you.
I don't know if
That's
it'll pick
the
up over
Bajoran
Discord.
way.
Yeah, it's not going to pick up
Oh,
over
okay.
Discord for you, but it'll pick up for me because I'm not through Discord. The point is, like, I just did the noise, and it's like, okay, so slapping the back of your hand to your palm will still make a noise, but it's like, why? Like, why did you write it this way? Why wouldn't they just clap their actual hands together? It's like, well, we wanted it to be sufficiently alien enough. It's like, yeah, but it's illogical. It's like it doesn't make sense. It's a weird motion. It doesn't work as well. Bajoran hands aren't necessarily different from our own, so it just doesn't make sense why they would do it that way. Like I think it
Hmm.
would have been I don't know make more sense if you're like yeah to celebrate or to like applaud someone you do snaps instead like how we do that for like poetry and stuff. But like if you had
Yeah.
the Bajorans like yeah they just all snap to applaud someone. I'm like okay that's logical. It makes a noise. It's an easy motion for the hand. Like I'm fine with that.
Hmm.
But they just do the weird backward hand clap and they do it because the writers are like we want this to be sufficiently weird so that it looks alien. When it's like here they're
Yeah.
like we want this to be a ball because it's sufficiently alien. It's like but it's dumb.
Well, no, no, no. So what they specifically say is like, oh, hang on, let me find it again. I was looking at him. Yeah, we want to put it in the bar because, no, that's not. Fuck. I know what they say. Okay, so we eventually came up with a very alien solution to the gavel as being a polished, ornate stone that would be hit on a striking surface. It perfectly well fit the bill. You know what works just as well than a ball? Well, much better than a ball? A cube. A
Yeah.
cube.
Anything with a flat
Polish that
surface.
cube.
A triangle.
Yeah.
Although that would probably mean you're stabbing yourself. Um, not a triangle,
Yeah.
like a pyramid, and you would stab yourself with it.
Pyramid.
Like,
Yeah.
it's just I don't know. Like, you could have had it be like, um, I don't know. I mean, I guess here's the thing. It would also work better if you just like if it was a ball on a pedestal, but you lifted the ball up and slapped the pedestal. Instead of like, oh, you
Yeah.
take it off the pedestal, slap it on this new surface, and then put it back on the pedestal. I'm like, this just doesn't seem real. I know we're harping on the stupid gavel, but it's almost a microcosm of the issue of this episode where they just wanted it to be weird and foreign, and they wanted to get their point across when they had no real thought into it.
Hmm.
This
Hmm.
ball is a microcosm of my hatred for this episode.
Yeah. Anyway, we're about to get into the real another example of the judge, but
Oh
also the
god!
main
At some point in
issue.
time, I'm gonna need to. At some point in time, I'm gonna need to refresh my drink because we're gonna talk about this for a long time. I'll wait until you go on some sort of rant.
Yeah. So, well, it's just this is the main argument like Cisco is going to present, where uh basically
No, no,
the
hold on.
arbiter says,
I do have one thing to. I do have one thing to say before that. I'm sorry. So after Tandro makes his point, Renoa says, "I've already read the." Hold on. Let's see. Da-da-da. All right. She says, "Sick Commander, the warrant is in order." So, okay, the warrant's in order. On what grounds do you ask I deny extradition? She says this to Cisco, or she says all of this to Cisco, and I'm like, wait a
yeah,
minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. So the warrant is in order. Again, maybe there was some preliminary investigation on her part where she actually like examined the law, looked at the warrant, and said it was all fine. I'm fine with that. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know about that. These people tried to
if
kidnap
it's
her. I
in
don't know if this warrant's
order,
in
yeah,
order anymore. Like, so
yeah,
again,
it's
the
like,
best I could. So here's the thing: it's not about extradition, but in real life, if you execute a warrant inappropriately, it becomes invalid. You need to
yeah,
use like so. Here's the thing: that doesn't make a future arrest impossible, although it can affect the nature of the case. Uh,
yeah,
but it will require you to get a new warrant most of the time.
yeah,
So you'll go to a judge, get the judge to approve a warrant, assuming you follow all procedure. If you then execute that warrant inappropriately,
yeah.
that
It's
could
sort of like,
that will. There's a few circumstances, a few where it will not invalidate the arrest, but it will invalidate certain other things. However, most of the time it means, guess what, buddy? You screwed up. You're gonna need to go get a new warrant. Hopefully, like this doesn't count as a future mark against the arrest. But in this context, like she's just like, yep, the warrant's in order. I'm like, whoa. Are we kind of just okay with the fact that these people tried to illegally execute a warrant?
And apparently got information on the station's like setup and such, probably from the Kardashians to do that kidnapping. Are we just fine with that?
I
Like,
I mean, yeah,
but
that's another issue.
yeah,
Here's the thing. Because they're using a Cardassian station, like they have to be aware that that's a possibility. You know, it's like, yeah, people are going to have information about the station. We have to sufficiently change it up so that they don't have 100% knowledge of our defenses and stuff like that.
hmm
At the same time, it just means like I don't think that would necessarily be as big of an issue. Maybe an international issue of like Cardassians are
yeah,
given information you weren't supposed to. But the problem is if you execute this
hmm
warrant ineffective, the ineffective execution of the warrant is the first issue, right?
yeah.
The
It's
second issue,
similar.
yeah, the second issue is
Uh,
like the status of of Dax. But yeah, so what were we saying?
I was actually going to give like an example of how this can really bone the prosecution if the cops screw this up. So if
Yeah,
a
go ahead, give
warrant
the example.
says basically like certain property can be searched for the suspect and such, and you find evidence there. But then you also search another piece of property that isn't related to the warrant, and you can't show sufficient cause to do so, and you find evidence there. Guess what? That evidence that's in the property that wasn't listed on the warrant probably not gonna fly. Probably not gonna fly in the court. But anyway,
So yes,
so
there's a million. Here's the thing: it's been way too long since I reviewed like the laws released to warrant. But I can tell you there are a lot of examples where I think the most you can sort of justify. I think one example this doesn't really apply, but if you are, let's say you have a warrant to enter someone's property and arrest them, right?
mhm,
If you find this person on another property, right? So you're like, okay, we want to go into this person's house and arrest them. You can have a warrant that
mhm,
says that.
mhm.
So if you see in the window they're in their neighbor's house, and then you go to the neighbor's
Yeah,
house and hold on, and then you
yeah.
enter the house illegally and arrest them, that would not invalidate the arrest.
Mm.
It would invalidate any evidence you find. So if you illegally entered the house to arrest him, and you saw like drugs on the table, those drugs are most likely not going to be admissible in court. That's obviously a different issue from this case. And again, it's been a while since I
Mhm,
reviewed laws relating to the execution of warrants, but that would not invalidate the arrest. So the thing I'm trying to say
mhm.
here is there's a lot of circumstances where they could try and arrest her. Like, for example, I think it could be a legitimate argument where you tried to arrest her while in Bajoran space.
Mhm.
Your extradition treaties with the Federation, therefore, this is not valid. It's like, well, maybe it could be. Like, you could have some sort of legal argument where it's still valid, even if it's in Bajoran space. Like, that could
Because
be some
it's
sort
a
of, yeah.
Federation-run
But then, of course,
station.
that involves Bajor coming in, and that becomes a separate issue, right? Instead,
Yeah,
they just say, yeah, even though we tried to, even though we gave her possible brain damage and kidnapped her, this warrant is in order. I'm like, no, it's not, Madam Judge. I know you're
mhm.
100 years old, but clearly, like, you have no idea what you're talking about. This is why the Bajoran people got conquered. Is because their justice system is reflective of their culture, which is really stupid.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
I'm joking. I'm
Anyway,
joking. But this is just really bad. So then Cisco is going to make his argument here. So he says, "You say the warrant's in order, but the name of the warrant is Dax. Certainly that doesn't refer to Jadzia Dax, a female, but the now deceased Curzon Dax, a male. This young woman wasn't even born 30 years ago." Tandro says, "You're arguing semantics. First off, that's not what semantics means. Uh,
yeah, no.
he's arguing actual facts. Like,
Yeah.
uh, this creature is a Trill. A symbiote known as Dax has progressed from one host to the next." Cisco says, "Exactly, from one host to the next. A different host, a different person. So I submit that the person he wants to extradite no longer exists, and I challenge him to prove otherwise." Now, this is what I hate. So Tandro says it's ridiculous, but then the judge lady, she says, "This would have been easier on me, Commander, had you not raised that particular point. Who gives a fuck if it's easier for you? You're a judge."
Yeah. Yeah, that was something I was gonna get into. Also, now I'm thinking, so I so with Cisco's point he raises, then I'd ask like, well, doesn't a copy of Curzon Dask, who committed the crime exists in that symbiote. And now, but then I think like, well, then we get into the question like, well, if we keep making a copy of Curzon, do we have to execute every copy of Curzon we make after that point? Oh my
Well,
god!
so
But yeah,
it's so much worse. And that's why we needed a lot of preamble to discuss the nature of Trill for this episode, because like this episode really again throws a wrench into like, well, what does it mean to be a Trill? Like Dax for some reason sees herself as guilty, like or worthy
hmm
of punishment. But anyway, so the judge says the stupidest line in the world, like I said, and then she says, "But the penalty for these crimes on your planet is death, and that is rather permanent. So before I grant extradition, you will convince me, please, that the person named in your warrant is the person who's standing here now." So I just that first line is really dumb, and it goes even further to the
yeah,
point where it's like, so that's the issue. Like what you just said is like, it disappoints me that you raised the issue, but that is the issue of this trial. Like the whole point is the warrant is in order. You wouldn't need a judge if the warrant was in order, right?
yeah,
So let's assume the warrant. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me correct myself. If the warrant is in order and it definitively cites Dax as someone who needs to be extradited, there's no need for a judge. It's when the question of
mhm,
who is Dax, that is the question.
yeah,
That is why she came here. She is complaining about having to do her job. The whole reason
yeah,
she was brought to the station is because of the whole reason she's complaining about the fact that Jadzia is not Curzon. That's the whole point. And she is complaining, oh man, why'd you have to bring me here? This would be the equivalent of a judge who says, all right, you have a defense attorney say, Your Honor, my client says he didn't do that. It's like, oh, I wish you hadn't said that. I wish you hadn't said that your client thinks he's innocent, because otherwise we could have just arrested him. It's like,
yeah.
it's so dumb.
Just
It makes me angry. But anyway, um, yeah. Then it's she says like that's where they first I guess adjourn, and maybe that's
yeah,
like the first day of trial. That's why she wanted to be very short, but it's still incredibly rushed and incredibly stupid. I
yeah.
really do not.
This basically sets like the opening arguments of both sides and like what's the question here? Oh, is this really the Dax that they
But this
want?
would have been why the
And
judge was even brought there. The whole
yeah,
point is that like the judge was brought there, and then the opening arguments should have been, preamble. Your Honor, Jadzia Dax is the same as Curzon Dax, and both are, within the realms of punishment for this crime. And then,
yeah,
the other side would have been, Your Honor, yada yada yada. Jadzia is not the same as Curzon, and therefore any punishment for her for Curzon's crimes is unjustified. That would have been the opening arguments, but that wasn't even the point made. Anyway, we
yeah,
then get to a scene I actually do really like. So
yeah. Because it's
Cisco,
basically a
Kira,
defense team.
yeah, well,
Like,
Cisco, Bashir and Kira are all, in this room, and they're complaining that Dax doesn't seem to even want to get out of this. Um, let's see. Cisco's like, look, I care, Doctor. We've been given the opposition access to our computers and station library. I don't know why you would do that unless you were ordered to by the court, which we haven't seen. So let's utilize them ourselves. I want you to find the medical evidence you can to support that Jedzia and Curzon are separate people. I mean, sure. We do see some of that medical evidence with brain scans later, so I'm okay with that. Uh,
yeah,
let's see. The
he,
let's see. Okay, hold on. One thing I do like is Bashir is like, look, sir, I don't know if there's any medical evidence on that. So I guess his argument is they're not mentally the same person, right? So,
mm,
find out that there's not like similar brain waves between them is was what we kind of end up hearing. But one thing I like
yeah,
is Bashir offers a really like sort of thing. I don't know if there's any sort of definitive evidence we can sort of say that they're not the same person. And Cisco's like, assume that there is, then find it. Like he's not hearing
yeah,
any option to the alternative. I really do like this, right? I
yeah,
really do like that his entire point is I don't care what the answer is. We're going to decide what is right, and then we're going to argue it. It's
yeah,
exactly how an attorney would look at the situation, and people might find that wrong, but the whole point of an attorney is you defend your client, right?
yep,
Here he's like, look, I don't care what you think the answer might be. We're going to assume we're right, and then we're going to find an answer that supports us being right. It's like
hmm
it. There's a little bit of there's logic in it, but there's also a lot of passion because this Avery Brooks is really acting a lot in the scene. He's really presenting. This is the one scene I like in this entire episode.
yeah.
So, you know, uh, if you check the Federation computers for any precedents, legal decisions involving Trills, uh, let's see.
Here says, is a Trill responsible for the conduct, for the acts of
Yeah,
this antecedent selves?
Yeah.
And Cisco says, right, that kind of thing. Kira asks, what if I find the answer is yes?
Yes, and
And
then
Cisco
Cisco
says,
says, then assume the answer is wrong. Then that answer is wrong, and we're gonna, for this moment on, our answer is no. That is so. I like this because again,
but
that
he
really sort
also
of
then
reflects.
follows it up with a, sorry, I want you to
No,
know
go on.
the end of it. He's like, but if you do find the wrong answer, I want to see it. I can't find why I don't know about it. Like,
So
that's,
you're almost presenting it wrong. He actually so the first part of this is a very impassioned statement. Then assume that that answer is wrong. From this minute on, our answer is no. And then he sort of calms down a minute and is a little bit more contemplative. But if you do find the wrong answer, I want to see it. Right. So it's like, Cisco is very passionate about this. He's very much on the ball, but he's also like he's acting logically and impassionately. It's very good. It's very well presented. I do really like this. And again,
yeah,
this sort of reflects the legal basis of a lot of defenses where, even if your client is guilty, you can then try and argue, well, the law is unjust. Right?
yeah,
It's like the biggest cases are, look, yes, my client did violate the law, but the law shouldn't be a thing to begin with. Right?
yeah.
So the idea is like, look, you need to find precedent that Trill are not responsible for their antecedent selves. And if that is not the case, then we're going to make that precedent here, and we need to find an argument for it.
Right.
So I really do like this. This is the best scene in the episode. It's actually a very good scene. If the entire episode was similar to this scene, this would be like an A episode for me. Unfortunately, it's not.
It's not. Yeah.
Anyway, Cisco's like, look, we have a few hours, people. Again, like some of this looks like really short time frame. I cannot believe it. Cisco contacts Odo on the monitor, and Odo's talking about let's see. Oh, Odo talks about the fact that the general who died, that Jax is accused of killing, or Dax is accused of killing.
Hmm.
His death, like unified the troops and helped them win the Civil War. He's touted as a hero. There's a statue of him all over the place. Everyone remembers. Second, everyone that's old enough to remember says the general and Curzon Dax were the closest of friends, comrades, inseparable. And Cisco's like,
Hmm.
well, that sounds like the Curzon I know. And then Odo says, but treason, plus the murder of his own best friend, strange business. If those charges are true, I don't want to hang Curzon Dax up by the heels myself. Let's
Hmm.
see. The general left a widow, according to Odo, and they're going to go investigate the widow. So, that's what Odo's doing.
Hmm.
Let's see
Hmm.
here. Oh, and yeah, then we meet. Let's see. Then we meet Odo's investigating the wife. So this is the woman who was married to the general who's dead, and it's the mother of the son who is the person trying to prosecute Dax.
Hmm.
So he's basically trying to avenge his father through the legal system.
Hmm.
And she's talking about how Curzon Dax was not responsible for the death of my husband. Uh, Odo's asking if he's certain of that. Uh, let's see. And then Odo's like, yeah, but your own son. And she's like, look, my son is obsessed with the death of his father. He never knew. He tried to persuade him not to reopen the case. He wouldn't listen to anyone, least of all me. You have to understand, Curzon Dax was closer to the general than any other man on this planet. He was a dear friend of the family. Curzon would have died himself sooner than conspire against my husband. So
Hmm.
the context here, and I'm going to kind of summarize what the scene has. The general died on a mission that only 5 people had the information on. So
Hmm.
basically, the general was on a mission. They got ambushed. Only 5 people had information on where the general was. So it has to be one of these 5 people who ratted him out.
Right.
Apparently, the other 4 people have been vetted by the Sun and deemed innocent because they all have alibis. The only person who does not have an alibi was Curzon.
Hmm.
We later learn exactly why that is. Uh, let's see. And I guess in theory, the information could have come from somewhere else. Which,
Hmm.
yeah, but at the time, right now, it looks like Dax is the one who's guilty. So
Yeah.
that's all the information we get really from that scene. I think Inina is her name. I think she's a decent enough actor. Like she's clearly hiding something, and Odo seems to be picking up on it, but he doesn't say
Hmm.
anything explicitly about it just yet. Um, we go back to Quark's bar, and we have another scene. This is the scene that I think gives us the most sort of information on the Trill. So,
Hmm.
uh, Tandro calls forth the Trill to talk to him, um, and then we get the Trill's name is Piers, which is interesting. So, let's see. Oh yeah, the judge says it's rather convenient to have you with us. How did you come here? I love how they have to have a justification because they put this on such a short timeline. There'd be no way for him to get here otherwise. So they have to
Yeah.
say, why were you here? And he says, because a Trill is involved, and the Trillian government requested that I be present during the extradition. So somehow he just got here. I guess he was the second this was became public news. He ran out here.
Yeah.
He doesn't. He says the judge asks some questions. I don't know him personally. Again, this is another thing I don't really like about it. There's this weird mix of like the prosecution here and the judge asking questions at the same time, which that can
Yeah.
kind of happen, but usually a judge is going to let this go, and the judge will only ask questions if they believe it's absolutely necessary, if they need information,
Hmm.
but generally they're not going to be involved. Admittedly, this is a judge trial, not like a jury trial, so they might be a little bit more inclined, and again, it's the Bajoran way of doing it. I'm okay with it. It's very disorganized, right? Like usually a judge
Yeah.
will only ask these questions once the prosecution is done with their questioning. So it's like, the
Hmm.
prosecution would ask all their questions, and the judge would say, before the defense comes up to cross, I'm going to ask a few questions myself that I need clarification on. So,
Hmm.
some information we get here. He asks. So the Piers is also a host for Trill, a symbiote. Tandro asks, how many hosts have you had? He is like, the symbiote within me has survived through the adult lifetimes of 7 hosts. Do you remember your very first host? Piers like, yes, of course. So it was a woman, as a matter of fact. Do you remember what you thought and felt when you were joined with the first host? Piers says, yes. The symbiote does carry memories of times shared with previous hosts. I think this is also confirmation that the memories are very accurate.
Hmm.
Like it's not like a faded memory, right? It's not like oh
Right.
yeah, like I have this memory from like 300 years ago, kind of. It's like no. It seems to be fairly clear, which again I'm okay with that, but it really does put symbiotes really high up on the pecking order of power. Let's
Hmm.
see. Tandro then asks, so if a crime is committed by a Trill, then the symbiote's next host would remain aware of it, would recall that crime. Pierce says yes. Tandro's like, they would recall the details of it? Yes. Would they feel guilt on it? Pierce says, oh yes. That's a really dumb question, because not
Hmm.
everyone who commits a crime is going to feel guilt.
Yeah.
Like, some people might feel justified in what they did. Some people might
Yeah.
not care. I mean, like, if I stole a stick of gum, which, I never would, but if I did, like, I don't know how much guilt I would feel about that. I mean, I guess I feel a decent amount of guilt because I did steal, but I'm thinking of like literally a stick of gum, like 3 cents. I wouldn't like be like rolling over my bed multiple years later, being like, "Oh God, I'm such a criminal. I stole a stick of gum." Like, it's just like, it's like, would they feel guilt? I don't know, man. It really depends on the person. Like, I don't know if you could.
Yeah.
It's
Like.
it's such as an assumed statement because it's like, again, this question presumes now that Dax feels guilty for what she did, which
Yeah.
again, it's just, I don't know if you could say that. Anyway,
Yeah.
let's see. Cisco then interrupts. This is not a trial. In Wait, hold on, Madam Arbiter. This is not a trial, and Mr. Tandro is not the prosecutor. So, uh, like, it really makes me question what the hell this is. Again, it's like it's a hearing to determine an extradition, but it's like, oh, this isn't
Hmm.
a trial. I'm like, well, yeah, it very clearly isn't a trial, but you're presenting it almost as if it is. You have witnesses, you have testimony, you have cross. Like, I don't know what else you want to
Hmm.
consider this other than a really shitty trial. Anyway, so uh, one thing I don't like is that then the judge tells Tandro, like, you've made your point, step down. Like, well, wait a minute, he might have other things to ask, but fine. So
Hmm.
Tandro then sort of says, like, look, the real point is that Commander Cisco would have you endorse the idea of the perfect Trill crime. To commit it, all one has to do is elude capture long enough to change hosts, and then he or she can go free. That's just true for everybody. Hey, if you commit a crime and then live the rest of your life not caught and die, you got away with it. Yeah,
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
life, man. Like, that's not the perfect Trill crime. That's, I guess, the perfect crime. Unless his argument is like, haha, the perfect Trill crime: commit a crime and then kill yourself right as your symbiote is about to be given to someone else. Haha, you've escaped. Like, imagine if you were scheduled, like, okay, like, look, you're really close to dying. You're gonna die soon. We want to transfer your symbiote like next week. You're like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready for my symbiote to go to a new host. I'm ready, right?
Hmm.
And then immediately
Hmm.
you're like, but wait a minute, before I go, you leave the house and you just go steal a stick of gum. You're like, hee, got it. And then your host is transferred over. It's like the perfect crime. I escaped it. I got my stick of gum, buddy. It's
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
it's so dumb. This is so dumb. Anyway, let's see. Okay, so then Cisco starts asking Pierce questions, like, you said you were with your first host throughout her adult life. Before the symbiote was joined with the host. Uh, he says the host already lived a significant portion of his or her life from birth to what age, sir? Pierce says mid 20s. So around mid-20s is when you're giving your symbiote, if you make it through the whole
Yeah.
process. Cisco
Yeah.
asks why not younger, and the whole point is we want to give the host a chance to develop and mature. They have to be old enough to make an informed judgment as to whether or not they are truly ready to be joined. We also get information later on that this is a process to help them understand their self-identity, so they're not overwhelmed by the symbiote.
Right.
So I think that works. And then Cisco asks, so once you're joined, the host personality is completely suppressed by the symbiote? Pierce is like, no, not like that. It's just the joining. It's a total sharing, a blending. Both host and symbiote, neither is suppressed by the other. Again, this really presents it almost like this weird existential horror where a symbiote's given to you and your personality is now merged into something new. You're kind of
Yeah,
dying.
and you're a separate person, and like, oh Lord, it's like the oh God, this. So I remember us discussing this, and like I was doing like math in my head of like how many innocent people are going to die because of this if they do execute Dax. And at the very least, whatever Jadzia and Dax are at the moment, that's I would argue some sort of innocent. Like at the Jadzia. So at the very least, even if you say every host who had memories in Dax at the time is guilty for the crime, like at the very least, I'd say like yeah, but you're still killing Jadzia, who is an innocent. Which at that point, it's like
See,
yeah, I'm sorry, but
we're going to go a little bit
oh
ahead to Voyager here. Do you
it's the
remember
two
that one
Vix,
episode of.
two
Yes.
Vix.
Yes. So, for anyone who doesn't know, in Voyager, there's two characters: Tuvok, a Vulcan, and Neelix, some sort of weird gamma quadrant, not gamma quadrant, uh, delta quadrant alien. Due to a weird flower plus transporter accident, they merge into a singular entity known as Tuvix, who is the best parts of both of them. Now,
Yeah,
this episode is very interesting, but essentially, like the decision comes to defuse them, and after 2 weeks of having been Tuvix, Tuvix doesn't want to die. He doesn't want the two
yeah,
paths that made him to be like separated because that would kill him. That is his opinion, and that is the opinion of some of the people on the ship. But at the same time, a decision has to be made. It's impossible to keep Tuvix and like not have Tuvok and Neelix not be separated. So like in that case, the Captain Janeway, she makes the decision, it's two lives over one, I am sorry. And she has the process reversed. Tuvix dies, and it's the end of the episode
yeah,
is presented very tragically because of it. That is what
yeah.
this
There's no
is.
right answer here.
Yeah,
There's
that is
no
what
right
this is.
answer there.
Dax,
Yeah,
yeah, Dax and the symbiote form a new individual. That is what was just confirmed here. So a
yeah,
new individual was made, entirely different from the two that came before. But even if Curzon Dax was guilty, and that guilt persisted in the symbiote. Well, first off, you'd have to assume that the guilt was not Curzon; it was the symbiote part of Curzon.
hmm,
I guess. Again, not very clear here. There's some mental jumping jacks the prosecution has some issues with here. They're like, okay, there's two merged entities who, as it were just acknowledged here, were their own unique individual, not Curzon or Dax. They were Curzon Dax. So now that means Dax is guilty. It's like, well, wait a minute. Wouldn't they not be because they're not the merged individual anymore? It's like, oh, they're at least half guilty. I'm like, okay, but then you throw in like a new person here, and it's like, uh, I don't know what this is. Like this is a very stupid argument, and you're presenting it pretty effectively. It's just,
yeah,
it's such a weird. God, we're only halfway through this episode, and we're already almost at 2 hours. We're gonna have a lot to talk about. Fortunately, most
yeah.
of the
This,
preamble was about an hour long.
yeah.
Anyway,
I
so Cisco talks about like, okay, so once you're a new person, like a new personality, new combined person, a totally different person, appears like from that standpoint, yes. And like that's the standpoint. Let's see. And Cisco's like, look, I don't know what other standpoint there would be. I'm in the right. Tanjiro's not very
base.
happy about this. He's like, let's return to what's important here, Madam Arbiter. The accused can remember any crime she committed as Curzon Dax, and nothing can be truthfully asserted in this hearing that can alter that fact. So just because she remembers the crime, she is guilty of it.
Mm, no.
He is such an idiot, and the fact that the judge entertains this means that she is also an idiot. And then, of course, like, Cisco's like, look, the memories are passed from one host to another. They're an entirely different person. Tanjiro gets mad. This is outrageous. Can't let Dax get away with murder. Then the judge is like, gentlemen, I said I wanted this to be an informal hearing, not riotous. We will take a 2-hour recess. Um, you're
Uh,
just really bad at keeping control of your court, lady.
y-
I'm super annoyed. But
yeah.
so they have like a little flash forward or like flash not flash forward, but like they have a little bit of a time skip. The judge is walking through the room, and she's talking about like, if it was up to me, I would just split you two right down the middle. They're doing the whole Solomon joke where it's like, oh
Oh
yeah,
my god.
two women claim that a baby's theirs, and Solomon's like, all right, then we'll just split the baby in half. One woman says no, the other woman says yes. That proves to Solomon that the woman who said no is the real mother because she's the one that really cares. Uh,
Mhm.
but she's like, why don't we just split them right down the middle? And then this is where Bashir has to come in and say, I'm afraid it's a little bit more complicated than that. Again, this is where we reveal that once 93 hours after they're joined, neither the host nor the symbiote can survive without the other. That's not true. The symbiote can survive. When they're removed, they can be put into someone else. So
Uh,
that's a little bit of an inaccurate statement by Bashir. The host can't survive because this is a parasite. Uh,
yeah.
and at which point Renault is just like, all right, let's proceed. This is where Cisco talks to Bashir, and he's asking about the medical viewpoint. It's like other than the gender change, there's marked differences, different blood type, metabolism, nervous system, height, weight. Tandro says that's irrelevant. This is not relevant at all. Again, he keeps saying stupid things. Yes, this is relevant. You might object that it's not relevant, but this is very clearly relevant. You're pointing out that these are different people. That's the argument. He's mad that the argument is being made at all. Let's see. And this is where Bashir also shows that they have very distinct, clearly unique brain scans, which helps prove that they're different individuals because they think differently. Again, I don't know why this episode has some sort of weird hang up on the fact that if two people think the same, they're the same person. No,
No.
I don't think that's how anyone views guilt. Because
Yeah,
again,
no.
what if hypothetically I used some sci-fi machine to put my knowledge of a crime into your head? Would you be guilty of that crime?
No.
Like
No. Very much no.
you have first person knowledge of that crime being committed. You feel as if you did it. Would you be guilty? No. I don't think
No.
anyone in the world would believe that.
Yeah.
For some reason, that's this entire guy's argument. Like, look, don't get me wrong. Star Trek does dumb things before, but this writer thought that that was a compelling argument. Unless he's trying to show this guy as being actually stupid, I don't think it works.
Yeah. I would hope it's just him. Like, I don't know.
It's really just dumb. Um, so let's see. All right, then Tanner's like, look, I've looked through your information myself, but I'm a layman, so I don't fully understand. I like that. He says you're quite an impressive young man, and Bashir's like, thank you. Like he's actually happy to get a compliment from this guy.
God. Yeah.
Like it's a little bit funny. It's like, oh, thanks, man. Like,
I'm great.
let's see.
I'm great.
So Tandra asks, like, look, I'm a layman, so maybe you can explain some of this to me. I lost my place in the transcript. Um,
Well.
okay, so he's like, first off, there's two. Like, tell me how a Trill brain works. And Bashir's like, look, there's two cerebral nuclei, one of the symbiote, one of the host, two brains, and these two brains talk to each other. Bashir's like, yeah, like computers link together. Very clear. Now, in your investigations, were you able to analyze separate wave patterns of these brains? Bashir's like, look, they don't separate functionally, but yes, they are separate. If you can analyze, well, Bashir does admit that like the brain patterns are so dependent on one another, he can't scan one without scanning the other. Like there's two brain waves, but they basically are so interdependent you can't detect one without automatically detecting the other.
Yeah.
Uh, and have the brainwave patterns of the symbiote changed since they were joined to a new host? With all available evidence, there's no way of telling. And then Chandra's like, what's your
Mm.
best guess? Bashir's like, I wouldn't care to guess. This is where the judge should take that ball and beat the prosecutor in the head with it because he's asking the doctor, a expert witness. Let me talk a little bit about expert witnesses. It would be very
Hmm.
weird. So expert witnesses are different from regular witnesses. Regular witnesses are
Hmm.
witnesses of the event, right? So if you have some sort
Hmm.
of knowledge of the event or the people involved, you're a witness. However, expert witnesses are experts in a topic. So they will usually
Hmm.
bring in information that's necessary to understand a context. My favorite example
Hmm.
is again in My Cousin Vinny. They bring up a woman and they use voir dire to examine her to say, look, are you actually an expert on cars? And
Hmm.
because they need to have an understanding of certain cars and certain how tires function to prove a case. So they need to bring in
Hmm.
an expert on cars to explain this is how cars function, or this is how like
Yeah.
the tires of cars would be working. And she has to prove that she knows enough about cars. And she doesn't
Yeah.
have any sort of degree or any sort of like training formally, but she's worked in cars her whole life, and she proves enough to the judge that she knows enough about cars. So really, anyone can be an expert witness as long as you can prove you have the information for it.
Right.
So this is a weird example because Bashir knows Dax. In fact, he probably would not be allowed as an expert. Like if I
Oh
was
yeah,
the
no, he's
prosecution
too
here, I
close.
would say, Your Honor, this doctor cannot give an objective opinion on the medical examples here. He is friendly. He is a friend. He is a coworker of the accused. He can't be this expert witness here. But let's assume they were okay with him being an expert witness. It's up to the prosecution to object to that, and clearly this prosecution's an idiot, so he's not objecting.
Yep.
At which point he's like, give it a guess. Again, judge needs to take the ball and beat this guy over his head because, like, you would not be asking them to guess. That is
Yeah,
so
no.
dumb. And then, of course, Bashir's like, look, I don't want to guess. Is there evidence of any change in the symbiote since they joined with this new host? Yes or no? And then Bashir says no. That's kind of okay, I suppose, because it's like, look, I'm not asking you to guess. I want you to tell me if there's any evidence of this or not. Again, given the nature of this is very stupid. I would have objected way more about it. Like, this guy does not. This is a very inappropriate line of questioning, especially after you ask them to guess. Let's
Yeah.
see. Cisco comes up. I'd like to call one more person who knew Curzon Dax, and he calls up himself. It's very weird, but yeah, you can technically do that.
Yeah.
And he asks Major Kira to direct the questions. Again, that's a little odd, but yeah, it's still like actually appropriate to our own sort of justice system. Admittedly, if you're calling yourself as a witness, he's not the accused, but I mean, it's weird, but it makes sense. Again, this is one of those examples where it doesn't follow our system, but it's logical that if you're if you're the solicitor or if you're the lawyer representing someone and you want to somehow use yourself as a witness, which is not really appropriate, but if somehow it was allowed, allowing someone else to direct the questioning probably would make sense. Here, it makes sense. So, Kira's like, hey, tell us about Curzon. And he's like, look, these are all the traits that are in Curzon. And then Kira's like, he actually has some sort of criticisms of him. He's like, oh, he drank a little too much. He could be more interested in women than maybe he should have been. Kira's like, I thought he was your friend. It's like, I'm simply pointing out that he's not at all like a young woman in this courtroom who I am still getting to know. And then he compliments her. He says, like, look, she's incredibly smart. She's incredibly intelligent. I'm still getting to know this woman. I don't know enough about her, but that shows they're different people. That someone who's incredibly close to Curzon doesn't at all know and understand Jadzia. I do kind of like this because it does sort of reincorporate the sort of issue before where Dax was saying, like, you don't know me, you know Curzon. So now he's using that as an example. Yeah, you're right. I don't know you, but I do know Curzon. That means you're different people, at least to me. It's weird. I don't know if it's strong evidence. Admittedly, none of the evidence in this case is strong, and my brain is starting to hurt talking about all of it. But at the same time, I
Should have
guess
made
this
it as a
makes some
two-parter.
sense. No, we're not making it a two-parter. Let's see. So, let's see. Whatever sense of honor I might have today. Let's see. I'm trying to read this. Like, again, it's mostly just Cisco arguing, and then Tandro comes in. He says, "Look, the commander's not on trial." It's like, look, I'm describing my friend, a man I knew very well. On the other hand, yeah, I can't tell you much about her. We're just getting to know each other. Starfleet, and then Tandro comes in. It's like, Starfleet officers have a reputation of being honorable, and I judge you to be an honorable man. As an honorable man, do you think this crime should go unpunished? Cisco says, I prefer no crime to go unpunished. And he says, then, if it were possible, even you would not argue with punishing the symbiote part of Dax. Cisco's like, how can you be so sure the symbiote was the criminal influence? If it were, what if it were Curzon, the Curzon host, that was responsible? Then the surviving symbiote would be completely innocent. And then Chandler's like, no, they're both guilty. You yourself had argued that the two personalities, once joined, functioned as one. Your own doctor confirmed it, and then they use this really dumb metaphor. When you put salt in water, the two become indistinguishable and inseparable. And then Cisco's like, I think you just made my point. When the water boils off, the salt returns to its original state. Pour that salt into another liquid, and you have something completely different. Jadzia Dax is an entirely different entity. And they pretend this is a gotcha. It kind of isn't.
Yeah,
Like,
no,
it's kind of like it's like, excuse me, Your Honor, metaphors are not evidence. It's just, it's a little
yeah.
silly. I get the point they're trying to make, but it's also like, this gets very
They're try-
confusing. This is the Trill itself are very confusing, and then you have this really ineffective trial where people who are not Trill are arguing what Trill are, and it just gets
Yeah,
really convoluted.
you're just sitting there like, what? It sounds smart. Yeah, it's smart, sure. But it's not. It's really not. And like, I get the logic. Like you said, like maybe it makes sense. Like I can kind of see the logic of like, oh, you can still separate these things, and it's even worse than that. If you separate them, an innocent person's gonna die. But it's like, like then we get into the math of it. Like, okay, so once you I like the better point to make would just be like, okay, so once it was taken from Curzon Dax, the symbiote went into Jadzia and made a new person, a separate individual who was not responsible. Like, it, it's just. But of course, Tanjiro, however you say his name, said the line of like, "Oh, made the metaphor first." And it's like, well, I guess we gotta play around with the metaphor. But no, the point should have just been like, then by your logic of like if you're going to use that, I'm going to reiterate that Jazia's Whip Dax is a whole separate person, not only from the original Jazia, but also from the Dax that was Curzon Dax. Like
Yeah, and I mean, I do like the idea that this starts off with him sort of saying, "Yeah, here's the flaws of Curzon," and then say, "Look, I don't know. Like Curzon could have been the negative influence there, and he's dead. So if you're trying to punish somebody, you might not have anyone to punish anymore." I guess like
yeah,
this also comes to the real issue of this. I don't know if it's maybe this weird culture that Tandro's from, but he seems to
hmm
believe that like this crime is a matter of guilt and not of justice.
well,
Like
to be fair,
it's the
he's his people are allied with the Cardassians,
true.
so
That's absolutely true. Their sense of justice is incredibly warped, but it's just more of an issue of like what is so he's the subtext, right, is he's an aggrieved son. He's not trying to get justice, he's trying to get revenge, right?
yeah,
But the person he wants to get revenge against doesn't exist.
yeah,
Like I think a better version of this episode would be there's actually like a discussion like maybe had privately like in like where this guy admits he's just kind of at it for revenge, and then someone convinces him that like the person you want revenge against is dead. I'm sorry. Like, if
yeah,
Curzon Dax was alive, you might have some sort of water here to make an argument, but you're really just trying to punish someone innocent because you can't get the person you want to actually punish. And then, he would realize the error of his ways and he would drop the charges. I think that would be
yeah,
probably a better ending to this sort of thing, but they don't really
yeah.
delve with that. Like,
They
I'd have been
kind
really
of
okay.
don't.
Like, well, so I mean, we're gonna get to it soon. Curzon is not guilty of any crime. Like, we later learn that the situation is a little bit different from what we think it is. And
Yeah,
I think a much more interesting version of this episode would be no, Curzon is guilty. Like, Curzon did something horrible. Maybe he had a justifiable reason for it, but he did something horrible, and Jadzia lives with that guilt. He went to his, like, Curzon went to his grave, never admitting this crime, but of course, when the symbiote's transferred, she learns of the crime, and now she's in this awkward situation where it's like, well, what do I do about it? Right? Like, is it me? Am
yeah,
I the one who's guilty? Or is Curzon the one who's guilty, and now like there's no point in really revealing the crime? Like, what would be the point in revealing the crime if he can't be punished anymore, right? So
right.
maybe she keeps it secret because she doesn't want to be judged for it. At the same time, maybe she is actually like feeling maybe I'm the one who's guilty and my part Curzon, should I be punished for it? And she doesn't want to reveal that because she doesn't want to be punished. That would be the compelling narrative here. But they
Yeah.
kind of just ignore that. So, um,
You know what's
this
even
part of
worse
the trial.
about them ignoring it for this whole
What?
thing of like, are they the same? Like the way they do it, the fact that it ends up being meaningless, this whole argument, because we find out the truth, and it's like, oh,
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these arguments are just not like these arguments are not the deciding factors here, right? And
yeah,
that's really the disappointing thing here. They adjourn briefly, and then the judge says, Lieutenant Dax will take the witness chair in 1 hour. Cisco goes up and says, "Look, I won't. If you won't defend yourself, you're not going to testify." And then they have another dumb line, I guess, to justify the fact that they have no idea how court hearings go. They're like, "This is a hearing, not a trial. She has no choice." I mean, okay, sure, but like, why? Why? Like, look, just say it's a Bajoran trial. Like,
yeah,
yeah, this is how Bajoran trials work. You don't have a choice if you want to testify or not, because in at least in the American justice system, the defendant doesn't have to testify. They don't have to go up on the stand. Um,
Yeah.
so, like, it's usually good if they do. A lot of I
Yeah.
remember there is a again, it's been a while since I've done any sort of criminal law work, but I do know that, like, I believe it's like jurors. If you have a jury trial, you're probably
Hmm.
incentivized to actually go on the stand as a defendant because jurors
Yeah, because you play to.
we know that jurors have a perspective of, if the defendant is not going out there to defend himself, are they actually guilty? Like that influences them. I
Yeah.
believe, and I believe it's just always good to go on the stand if you can. Obviously, there's certain examples where you don't want your defendant to take the stand because they're not going to do a good job of defending themselves. But
Hmm.
I do believe with judge trials, with bench trials, you do it's usually probably worse if the defendant takes the stand, simply because,
Yeah.
again, like, the judge is not going to be as influenced by the nature of you not defending yourself, and at the same time,
Yeah.
trust me, like, as someone who has worked with defendants, it is not easy even if you're innocent. I have seen people, like, because of the intense levels of questioning, fall to tears on the stand, even when they're 100%
Mhm.
innocent. Right? It is not
Yeah.
something that is easy
Yeah.
to do, and you are, like, you're gonna have lawyers poking and prodding at every little thing you say. It's hard, but I wish they had just made it a point that this is a Bajoran trial, and, like, you don't have to say it's a hearing, not a trial. It's like, that just feels like they're admitting. That just feels like they're admitting that we don't know what we're talking about, so we don't want this to be an actual trial. Because if we call
Yeah.
it an actual trial, people are gonna realize it's bullshit. It's like, well, here's
Yeah.
the thing: it's a hearing. It's still bullshit.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's
uh, we then go back to Odo on the camera. He says, let's see, the, yeah, he found Curzon Dax's records, and let's see. You can't tell me Curzon would log in and communicate with the enemy. Odo says, no, nothing like that. But the log shows a number of conversations between Dax's office and General Tandro's home. Cisco's like, well, they were close friends. And then Odo's like, a number of conversations took place when the general was away from the front. So Cisco's like, the wife? And Odo's like, the wife. So Curzon Dax was having sex with his best friend's wife.
fucking
Uh,
plow like Giga Chad move.
No,
Base.
no,
Hey.
no, no. Don't stop it, Pike. You're being cringe. This is really shitty. This is really shitty of Curzon.
You know I meant it in jest, but yeah, yeah. This is the true. Well, this is one of
This
the
is the
two
whole
troops.
this is we can kind of summarize it now. So, um what's it called? Curzon was having sex with Anina, and behind the general's back, the general
Hmm.
died. He was literally caught in the crossfire of an accidental. It wasn't even an intentional ambush. He died in just a small, like, accidental conflict. Now,
Yeah.
they wanted to make it seem like the general died a heroic death, and so that would
Mhm.
inspire the troops. The troops were inspired. Then they go and, like, win the civil war, and now, like, the general is a living legend, or he's a dead legend. He's a hero of the battle. So now neither Curzon or Anina can really admit that the general wasn't as brilliant of a tactician or that smart or even that good of a person, because to do so would destroy, like, a part of their culture, right?
Hmm.
It's
Well, no,
more
no, no,
important.
no, no, no. It's even worse on the part of the general because they make a point of like he was going to sell out the government, uh, but the rebels were like, "Oh, it's the enemy, kill him."
Yeah,
Like,
like,
yeah.
the general was going to sell out the government. He was basically going to, like, I guess, cut his losses because he realized it was a losing conflict. And,
Hmm.
when he died, it suddenly became this matter of, well, we can have him be a hero and live as a legend and have the society like, unify around him so that it can rebuild itself. And
Hmm.
Nina and Curzon were like, we're going to go to our graves with this information, because if it gets out, it would be bad.
Yeah, a
And
similar issue comes up later in the series with the Bajoran government. Now I think about it, and that one handles
yeah,
that so much better.
yeah, I mean, like,
Uh,
I do like the wife here, where she says, like, look, my husband was no hero in life, was not the hero in life that he was in death, In death, he became a legend, and I became the legend's wife. There are people who did not even know my husband who still contact me. Decades after his death, they still mourn him. Uh, and she's like, you don't? He's like, no, because I knew the man before he became a legend, but I also knew my place in history. My place is to carry on bravely, never to remarry, to represent my husband at the banquets given in his name, never to talk about who he really was, because no one wants to hear that. Um,
Yep.
and then this is where like Odo's like, look, you may have to hear it now because an innocent person is in danger. It does remind me. There is a scene I do kind of like it where she asks about Curzon, and this is where Odo kind of gets his first clue. She asks about Curzon, and Odo's like, Curzon's been dead for years. We're talking about Jadzia Dax, and like it's funny because the almost callous way Odo brings it up conflicts with the way
Yeah.
she like looks really sad at hearing Curzon died.
Yeah.
But and Nina says like no matter what is said, they will still embrace his memory, for he was and always will be the hero who died for his people. But perhaps it's time for my place in history to change. This is where she's gonna basically admit she cheated on him. Like
Yeah.
she's not gonna ruin his legend, but she's gonna basically destroy her own reputation. Like
Yeah. She
I'd imagine.
bears the dishonor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she like you. This is our legend. This is our hero, and you cheated on him. You're a piece of shit. Like she's basically gonna go down in history, but she's doing it to save Jadzia. I like the wife in this episode. It's not terrible. It's just not great. The
Reminds me
episode.
of um I know I go on about Roman history, but in Legends, like why they overthrew the kings, the last king, the tyrants, was
Mhm.
actually because of this woman who she was like, the most virtuous one, and the son of the king saw how virtuous she was, and was like, oh, I want that. I wanted to follow that, basically, and right, did things right, basically by
Yeah.
like the way it went was, oh, I'll do it, and she's like, I don't care, and oh, well, if you don't let me do it, I'll just claim I did it anyways and dishonor you and your husband, and it's like, yeah. But in the end, she like told everyone like, yeah, he forced me into it, and like she bared the burden of resolving it by making it happening. And unfortunately, due to ancient customs, she committed suicide because that's, yeah, ancient customs and views on women. Yeah, but it
Yeah.
inspired everyone like, we need to right this wrong of like, this. She bared the burden so that they could, do the do to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so the next scene we have is a scene between Cisco and Dax. Again, he's trying to like he's basically questioning. It's like, look, you've been protecting her reputation. That's it, isn't it? That's why you wouldn't even defend yourself. There are worse things than an illicit love affair. Um, oh yeah, he asks if Tandro's Curzon's son, and she's like, no, no, it's not. It's not that scandalous, right? It's not like she's being prosecuted by her own like kind of son. I mean, that would have been an interesting dynamic too. But uh, let's see. So Cisco's like, then what's holding you back? Um, let's see. Oh yeah, Cisco punches the pillar in anger, and like Dax comments like, "Oh, you're still angry." It's like, don't talk to me about temper, old man. like, you know, there is this dynamic between them, and she's like, "Look, you're not going to get me off track here. Do you still remember the Argosian lieutenant who threw a drink in your face?" Cisco says, "Yeah, you knocked me down the right across, or you knocked me down in the right cross before I could kill him. I still have the scar from your ring finger." And then Dax comments like, I do kind of like this little thing where it's like when she tried the ring on after Curzon died, it just slipped right off her finger. I'm like, that's kind of sad. It's like this nature of
Yeah.
like it was his wedding band, and it's like, oh man, it's like the relationship's gone now, which is based on what we know about Trill. Yeah, that's the case. Like you're not really supposed to have relationships with people that you had relationships with in the past because that kind of like they believe every
Yeah.
symbiote should have a new experience.
Yeah.
Um, Cisco says like, look, you got to help me, old man, because I don't have any more arguments. Honestly, Cisco, you haven't made any really good ones so far yet. I mean, don't get me wrong. Your opposition is not much better, but at the same time, like I expect better from you, Cisco. Um, Dax is like, look, allow this to happen, and Cisco's like, look, you're under my command. I can't allow it. Um, and then like Dax does comment, like I won't discuss it with you, but I do feel shame for Curzon's indiscretions. When one of my kind stumbles, we carry on that mistake forever. I can't tell you what part of Curzon Dax couldn't stop himself from shamelessly being with another's wife, but I'll tell you this: he loved her, and for whatever that's worth. So she doesn't want to ruin this woman's reputation because of this. Um,
hmm
and again, like the scene is mostly repeating what we kind of already know, but I guess it's reinforcing the idea that this is a constant conflict between them, where she will refuse to defend herself. I don't like
hmm
again. There's other ways to defend yourself that are not revealing this woman's reputation, right?
Infidelity, yeah.
Yeah, you could just hide behind the Federation government. You could hide behind the Bajoran government. You don't need to accept death here, but for some reason the episode pretends like she does. So it's a little
Mm.
annoying, but I do like the little ring metaphor. I think it's like an interesting sort of look into what it's like to be a Trill and live past all of your friends dying, stuff
Mm.
like that. Um, the judge comes back in. She's like, "Look, I'm not sure if you're 200 years older than me or if you're about the same age as my great granddaughter. At first, I wondered which of these two you were. Now I'm bothered by the likelihood that you may be both. Let's finish this." So again, like this is the judge kind of like I don't know. It's a bit weird, but I guess I like that because this is probably the first time she's talking to Jadzia. At the same
Mhm.
time, it's just like this case is such a sham. I can't even like look at this judge and not want to take the ball and throw it at her. I'm like, you are terrible. You. This whole episode is horrible. Please stop. You are
Oh,
100 years
oh, we'll
old.
win it in
Clearly, you
appeal.
are.
We'll win it in appeal. We'll win it in appeals. Calm down. Calm down.
Well, they're
Calm down.
gonna win here. They win here already. But it's so
Yeah.
stupid. It's so stupid. I have dealt with
Yeah,
real
but
life judges. I have dealt with real life judges that it is a miracle they can put two shoes on, right? But this woman still outclasses them. Like
yes, but Hollins, you can't throw the gavel at them. You just win it in appeals. God.
it's a ball. I'm allowed to throw it.
You're not. You're not allowed to throw their
Ugh.
stupid round. You know what? Just because it's a stupid round one, throw it at them.
Look. Okay,
Huh.
let's finish this scene. So, this scene does have some interesting things to it. I'm gonna kind of super summarize it here. So Cisco's asking Dax all these questions, like, "How'd you know you want to be joined?" She's like, "Oh, as a child." Tell me a little bit about the process. She's like, "It's a huge honor, but it's a great competition." How did Jadzia win it? Uh, Dax says, "By getting scholarships, competing against other young people. I was tested in countless ways." And over the course of this, Cisco's basically asking her questions that sort of highlight who Jadzia was before she was joined. Like it transfers
hmm
into tell me about the process of getting joined to tell me about Jadzia. And he asks
hmm
like, among other things, what academic degrees do you hold, Lieutenant? And she says, I hold premier distinctions in exobiology, zoology, astrophysics, and exoarchaeology. Um,
hmm
is there a real life example of what a premier distinction is? Is that like a degree?
I would assume it's like
Well, because the next question is, how many of these did you earn before you became a symbiote? And Jadzia says all of them. So she's 28 and she holds 4 degrees. I don't know what a premier distinction is. Now it's possible to hold full
yeah.
degrees. I'm not saying you can't, right? But it's just an issue of like, how
I
many like
I would
I don't know what a
assume
premier
it's
distinction
like
is.
just with distinction. I would have just well, hang on. No, that's not.
Well, I do want to point out we do meet characters in this setting who like finish high school like at like 15 and then they join Starfleet. So like
Yeah.
it could be a very common thing in the future with their advanced education that you like you get like doctorates like super young in age. I mean, I'm okay with that, I
Yeah.
guess, as an idea, but it's just also a degree of like, damn, like she really is overqualified, and that's before you consider the symbiote. Um, Cisco
Yeah.
says this brilliant, independent young woman has done nothing in her life but contribute to society. How can anyone justify trying her for a crime allegedly committed by another entity? I find that a really dumb argument too, because it's like, oh, she contributes to her society. She's really smart. She's done only good things
So
in her
does
life.
Dexter.
That
Yeah.
yeah, that absolves her. That absolves her of any sort of like guilt, even if she was guilty. And it's just a weird argument. It's like this is that. Here's the thing. Tanjiro should be like, excuse me, relevant. It doesn't matter if she's a good person who contributes to society if she committed a crime. Like she's still guilty of
Yeah.
it. But then he makes the point, how can you try her for a crime that she allegedly committed? It's like I don't think you could charge anyone for a crime that allegedly another person committed. Like I just don't think it matters that how educated she is. It'd be like if she
Yeah.
was dumb, it'd be okay to try her for a crime someone else committed if she was dumb.
Yeah.
Like
You
that's
know what
almost how it comes
this is?
across.
You know what this is? So you know how lawyers in closing statements will try to appeal to the jury in some way,
Yeah.
and you hear some stupid ones like there was a really stupid one that I heard.
Well, so
Uh,
I'll help you with this. What this more comes across is like the nature of like trying to highlight who the person is before you make the judgment. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, like, let's hypothetically say, uh, you were driving and you accidentally hit someone with a car, killing them, and you're on trial for
Mm-hmm.
vehicular manslaughter. It's like, okay, you might be guilty, but you might be trying to get the jury to not say guilty because look, they're not. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't for any purpose here. This is a good person. Just because freak accident happened doesn't mean they should be found guilty of the crime. Now, there's other things that go into it. Usually, these sorts of
Mm-hmm.
statements would also be resolved for um, like character hearing, like basically like after judgment's been decided, but before the punishment's been given. You'll have these sorts of things that say, "Here's how they are as a person. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they are they worthy of this punishment?" So
Mm-hmm.
that's when these things would usually come up. But it's just the way this argument is presented. How can you justify trying her for a crime allegedly committed by another entity before she was even born? As like, you shouldn't do that because of her brilliant contributions to society. It's like, no, you shouldn't do that because it's wrong. Her
Yeah.
contributions are independent of it. It's like it's almost like
It's almost like a
look,
social credit thing of like, if you get enough good boy points, you can commit one murder for free.
oh boy, I hope society functions like that in the future. It's like, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. I donate to a lot of charities. I am allowed to kick one child.
I mean,
You say you
that's
save it
kind
for you
of.
save it you save it for when you're on an airplane and there's just a really annoying kid. You pull out your good boy points and then you drop kick the kid.
Oh my god. Um,
Anyway,
I
anyway,
don't know. I couldn't make use of that.
Anina enters with Odo, which is just really like, oh, here we're here to invalidate the entire episode here. By the way, um,
Yep.
this hearing's unnecessary. The accusations are erroneous. He's like, Mom, what are you talking about? And she's like, Madam Arbiter, Curzon Dax is accused of sending a transmission to the enemy that betrayed my husband, but I know where Curzon was at the exact time the transmission was sent. He was in my bed. I'm like, and it's like, oh, this is dramatic. It's like, you want to, and then the judge's like, Miss Tandro, you may want to re-examine your extradition request until the hearing is adjourned. It's like, this woman who I don't know who she is, she walked in here and said she fucked Curzon. We're gonna re-examine the extradition request. Like, who is like my first? If I was a judge here, I'd be like, first off,
That's who
who
she
are
is.
you? Second off, who allowed you in my courtroom? Third, why should I believe anything you say? Everything you're saying here is like, it's borderline hearsay. I don't know who you are. You're saying, oh, he wasn't in the bed because he was with me. Prove it. Like, what evidence do
Do
you
you
have, woman?
have the semen deposit he provided at that time, ma'am?
Okay, no, I don't think we need to go that far, Pike. But it's just the point of like, it's not hearsay at all. But it's just a matter of like, I don't know who you are. We haven't vetted you as a witness. Shut up. Leave. Like, it's so dumb. Um, but that's how the episode. That's how the trial ends. That's the end of the trial.
And they
There is a
don't
nice
resolve
scene between
anything.
there's a nice scene between Anina and Dax where she's like, "Look, Curzon tried to protect me, and you tried to protect me. Thank you." She's like, "Look, Curzon's still a part of me that still remembers what you had together. Um, it was Curzon who swore himself to silence to preserve my memory, Jadzia, not you. Let's see. Um, look, and then she's basically saying like, look, my people will remember the general for what he did. No one will even know that he was the one who tried to betray us. This is where it's revealed that he tried to betray them. Um,
Mm.
and then she's like, as for you, there's one favor I would ask. Live, Jedzia, live a long, fresh, and wonderful life. And that's the end of the
Mm.
episode. All right, so final thoughts here, closing arguments. This is a
Oh
really
God,
this is a
D.
really bad this is a D episode. There are a few things I like. I kind of like the wife, Inina. I kind of like that. I definitely like Cisco in a lot of these scenes. I like the ring metaphor, but God, this is just such a D. I think it kind of I think it almost character assassinates all of Trill society.
Oh
It's
my
like,
God, yeah.
here's the thing. One of the first things, if you had a society of people who merge their memories with symbiotes and, that memory carries over into next individual, the first question you would have as a society is there
I would
guilt
handle
carried
this
between them?
criminal. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
and you would have
yeah.
very clear policy And here's the thing: if it was me, you'd probably have a society that's like, yeah, no, you do not carry the guilt. Guilt is more than just the knowledge of the crime, unlike what this dude
Yeah,
thinks, right?
yeah,
And but that's the thing, right? The society would have very strict rules about like strict policy that says no, you are not guilty. Any extradition treaty that says you're guilty is wrong. Like that would be such a clear policy that it would be stupid to argue otherwise. So Trill Society, the fact that they don't have they for some reason are not accounting for this is really dumb. Cisco, he makes a lot of bad arguments. It's really dumb. Bajoran Judge lady, really dumb.
I just
Like Jadzia,
bad.
again, I feel Jadzia is also like destroyed here in terms of character. Like, it's just one episode. It's not really super relevant. You can forget this episode exists, but this gives us a lot of information on how Trill function. So it's almost not skippable. It's like
Yeah,
this is like super relevant to Trill. Like this tells us probably more about Trill than we've gotten in any other episode. So we
yeah,
almost can't skip it. At the same time, it's a really bad episode.
yeah.
Even
You
if
know
you're
what
not
makes
a
me
lawyer,
mad?
here's the thing: even if you're not a lawyer, right? It is very illogical on so many fronts. Some of the arguments are very like flowery and lame. Like I
Hmm.
can like, I mean, I don't remember what I thought of when I first saw this episode, but I might have just thought it was dumb. I might have just let it play in the background and like not even thought about it. Or when I was younger and I saw it, of course I was a kid. I didn't even think about it. Right? I was like, I was like, yeah, I guess Cisco wins his argument, yay, right? But watching it now, it's just this is a bad episode. I was rewatching it earlier
Yeah,
today, and I was just getting mad. Like,
yeah. You know what's really bad about it, in terms of like production and such? So, because of this episode already being made and they had this done first, the staff actually thought, oh, in that case, we shouldn't really make Duet,
wait,
like,
they thought
because they were
that?
like, yeah, because they're like, we already have this in season one. Let's not make Duet right now. But Duet, Duet. You
Oh
know
my god,
Duet.
Duet is unironically one of the best episodes of all of Star Trek. Like,
Yeah.
I cannot wait until we get to Duet. Like, and
Oh,
it is like, but here it's just like if this episode had stopped Duet from being made, oh man, this is a that would be the real crime here.
yeah, everyone,
Um,
Duet is like, at the very least, it is the S tier of season one. If and yeah, like it is very much one of the hallmarks of DS9. Like it's one of the ones that you show people like this is what DS9 is at its best, and it becomes consistently like close to this quality.
I might say I'm trying to think of like, yeah, Duet might be the best episode of
Hmm.
season one. I think my favorite
Yeah.
episode, unironically, might be the next episode we're going to talk about, uh, the Nagus.
The, wait, are we just
Um,
skipping the passenger and move along home?
no, I'm sorry, you're right. I think we skipped those before, so we went to the Nagus. So I had those like written down differently. No, yeah, we do have the passenger next. Which what was the passenger
Is a
about?
Bashir? It's a Bashir episode, but it's not a
Oh,
Bashir
it's
episode.
it's it's that episode, and then of course we have my favorite episode, Move Along Home. Everyone's favorite episode.
Shut your
Um,
mouth. I will.
well, anyway,
I will. Mm.
you know what? Here's the thing. We have probably. I will say this. It seems episode 7, Q-less. This episode, Dax. The Passenger, I don't remember being bad, but it's not really good. And then, of course, we have Move Along Home. They're the weak part of this season. Everything after this, from what I'm seeing in the list I have, everything after this is good. I think it's
Mhm.
more or less like decently
Mhm.
good. So, 4 episodes that are just kind of weak. Oh, we also had Babel, which was kind of weak, but I don't think it's like a bad episode. It's just not strong.
Yeah,
But that being said, I think this episode might be one of the reasons I was not a big fan of Jadzia for most of the series. Just because, like, this is the first Jadzia episode, right? Like, this is the first
and
episode where
it's
she is front
just
and center. Everything else is like,
yeah,
there's almost like prior to this, there's a lot of nebulousness about like what does it mean to be a Trill. We get some information and sort of drip fed to us. This is the first real like experience of the character in the Trill Society outside of TNG,
yeah,
which again, it's had a lot of changes since TNG, and this is not a good episode. Um, it's not a
yeah.
good episode on so many fronts, and I really do think that like I don't know. It really is just it comes across as they were trying to do Measure of a Man from TNG,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
they just did not have like I don't know what it is. I don't want to say they don't have the skill because we know they have the skill. They did duet, uh, but it just comes across
Like,
they were almost rushed. This feels like a rushed endeavor. You know, it feels
let
like
me. I remember seeing
like
the story idea that served as this episode's genesis was thought up during an approximately 5-day brainstorming session between Ira Stephen
oh
Bear, Blue
no,
Bastard, and
don't
Peter
say
Allen
that.
Fields during the week of June 15th, 1992, which led them to devise the premises of the first conceived. So this is the first conceived episodes of DS9 season one, apart from Emissary. So this is like first batch. I think that's why. I think it's just like
I
they don't
mean,
know what they're doing
sure,
at this
but
point.
I guess that's my issue is not really in the sense of they don't know what they're doing. And again, that almost strengthens the idea that this would be their first batch because I'd imagine when you're writing DS9, your first thought is what worked in TNG and how do we sort of make our own versions of that to start off the series.
Hmm.
So they're probably thinking like, hey, one of the best episodes of TNG is Measure of a Man. Let's bring that here. Let's bring some version of that with the Trill because again, Trills are a unique existence, right? So
Yeah.
it's a fun thing to talk about. But here it's just like they don't do it feels too rushed, right? You could have an
Yeah.
entire episode where like the start of the episode is this guy comes in, presents an extradition thing and like so how it should work, right, is uh like a Federation council member or Federation like high level official, right, comes in
Hmm.
alongside these people, and Cisco's like, "Whoa, why are you here?" Maybe it's an admiral, right? Like, "Why are you here, Admiral?" It's like, "I have some bad news,
Hmm.
Cisco. One of your officers is being extradited for a crime." And they're like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, and then they present the warrant, and it's Jadzia, and then it's like this would show that the Federation Council is already like on board, like that maybe
Hmm.
they had some sort of preliminary discussions, but unfortunately they lost out. And then it's like,
Hmm.
look, the Trill government is angry about this. However, you can make a point that this other government, I can't recall what the other government's called again. It's like the um I can't recall what they're
Civil
called.
War Planet. Civil War Planet.
Yeah.
I'm just calling them
Well,
Civil War Planet.
the aliens that are trying to prosecute Dax, you know, basically um, they're trying like they're allied with the Cardassians. So you have
Hmm.
the Federation basically say like, look, we don't want to cause any more tension between the treaty between the Federation and Cardassia, so we are allowing them to utilize this treaty. And then
Hmm.
again, that's when Bajor steps in and says, well, we're not part of the Federation, and you're in Bajoran
Yep.
space.
Yep.
So that's when you have that argument, and the Federation's like, you know what? All right then, like hands off. Like, hey, we followed our part of the procedure. Like, you can even have the admiral give like a wink and a nudge just to go like, okay, thank God this happened this way because we didn't want this to happen, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And from
Hmm.
there, you have a majority of the episode devoted to a trial. And again, you don't have it be some bullshit where, oh, by the way, all this is meaningless because Curzon didn't do anything wrong. It's like, no, no, no. Have
Yeah.
it be that Curzon did do something wrong, maybe for the right reason. Again, the general was going to sell out his people, so Curzon killed him, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you're my friend, but I killed you. That could be a very tragic story. But by doing that, Curzon's guilty, and now Jadzia feels that guilt, so she's willing to accept punishment. Because I'd imagine that's pretty weird if you're given a symbiote and suddenly you have all this guilt of killing your best friend, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And it's like, oh wow, like yeah, that would probably really affect you, and you might actually be like willing to accept punishment on behalf of Curzon, right?
Hmm.
But then you have all these arguments that talk about the nature of like the Trill, and you could have had representatives from the Trill government come in and say, no, 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 we're here to defend Jadzia.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's so many things you could have done with this episode. It's very bad. It hurts me more because I'm a lawyer and I see just how stupid it is. Again, it doesn't matter that it's an alien court system. It doesn't make sense in universe. It's very illogical. It's very inefficient. I cannot imagine a spacefaring intelligent species developing this as their judicial system. It is nonsense, right?
Yeah.
At least with when we see the Cardassian judicial system, it's nonsense, but it has justification. Well, so it's not
Yeah.
nonsense. It seems like nonsense to us, but it has justification based on their culture,
Yeah,
and you can kind
yeah.
of
If you
nod along and
understand
be like, this
Cardassian
is
culture, you
like I
go
don't
ahead.
agree with this, but I can sort of nod along and be like, all right, all right, like I don't agree with it, but I can see where it's coming from and how it functions in their world. Like it's not bad world building writing. Here, this is just bad. So,
Hmm,
I
hmm.
mean, this is a long discussion, and I think hopefully we made some decent points and we weren't too stupid about it. Um, as per tradition, Pike, I need you to finish off. About to say something right before I cut the recording. So say something profound.